obviously the culture has changed.
Yeah.
You know, some people knew enough not to do this years ago, but you know, chefs don't go out and get drunk with their staff, or do other things. And even the staff, you know, in this book I just did, I have a moment where the team in the restaurant I write about comes into work on the first day of their work week, which was a Tuesday. And I say, like, this is not the old generation of chefs. You know, they all look fresh, you know, like years ago, you know this, if you came into a restaurant on the first day of the week, you know, people were coming in hungover. They look like crap. You know, they're telling these crazy weekend stories. You know, these people look completely wholesome. You know, they have water bottles.
Yeah.
You know, they have a skip in there. They look fresh as a daisy, all of them, to a person, right? That's different. For, you know, for better or for worse.
Press the button. Yes.
Hold on.
Wow. We've already fucked it up. It's crazy.
That's right. We're pros around here, you know? There's 50 cameras, all kinds of shit happening.
It's weird because it's daytime. I'm not totally sure what to do with myself.
Welcome to a brand spanking new episode of Bang Gong Podcast. I am the producer formerly known as Nick Jimenez, and I am joined as usual by 8th grade basketball MVP, award-winning Elvis impersonating Santa Claus, and alleged chef Michael Beltran.
All true stuff.
We are joined by a very special guest, podcaster, author, and we'll find out all kinds of other stuff like, was it an ice cream place around here?
Yeah.
One-time ice cream
Assistant
place
manager.
GM, or assistant manager. Love this.
Yeah.
Andrew Friedman, he is here promoting his brand new book, The Dish, which I placed very sneakily next to you on the booth in case you want to
I didn't even notice
in case
that.
you want to refer to it over there.
My first words on the show are me talking about how unobservant I am.
It's kind of like that
Thank
Adam
you for
Sandler
that.
movie.
Thank you for that.
And so we're going to take a little beat here because this conversation will also be published via your podcast, Andrew Talks to Chefs, which people should go and listen to. Cool. So we'll take a breath. And now I'm stepping all the way out. I have nothing to do with this. This is just between the two of you.
Man, I am pumped. I have to say that in the world of like food conversations, understanding chefs, people who actually like take time to understand what food really means, I mean, there's very few, and you're like at the top of that totem pole.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, so the fact that you're sitting at our table and you wanted to do this, I'm incredibly honored, pumped, and also shocked.
Shocked? I've been wanting to sit with you we had the plague.
Yeah.
So that messed us up. But
that was a thing.
We've been messaging each other since you started the show.
Yeah.
You know, it kind of came up in Nick's intro, but you know, I was born in New York. I was in Florida though, in Miami. I went to high school down the street here.
Wild.
At Ransom Everglades, and but I was here from ages 2 to 17.
Wow.
So you know, I've been aware of you forever, and you know, I'm honored to be sitting here with you. So
yeah, it's well, I'm shocked when people want to do this, because the way that me and Nick started this, and some of the talking about the plague, like all the ups and downs and weird like turns this podcast has taken, and it's cool. I'm incredibly honored, so thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It was thank you. It was something I wanted to do.
So first of all, let's talk about you assistant managing the ice cream place that's down the street from here.
So I went to high school. We're on Main Highway here in Coconut Grove, Florida. I'm getting reacquainted. I haven't been here in like probably 4 years. I just drove here from downtown Miami, and it was all starting to come back to me in the back of the Uber. I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to turn on McDonald.
Right.
We're going to turn on Bayshore Drive. We're going to turn on whatever it is, McFarland.
Yeah.
You know, it all came back. But I went to high school down the street, and we're at the corner of Main Highway and Fuller. And when the driver was trying to, it's all pedestrian now, turn onto Fuller, I went, oh, Chugs is on the corner of Fuller. And I was wondering if it was going to be the same space, because right across Fuller Street from where we are sitting, older listeners will remember there used to be a chain of ice cream stores called Steve's Ice Cream. And we did what they called mix-ins by hand. It was kind of like a precursor to
Cold Stone.
Cold Stone.
I was about to say it sounds
Yeah.
like Cold Stone.
Yes, it was like Benihana of ice cream. Like you'd
Right.
slam the ice cream down, you'd put the fillings in it, and then you'd work it over and put it in the cup, right?
Right.
And I was an assistant manager. I had a key to the store.
At how old?
I think 16.
Man, it's crazy.
I know I could drive myself to work,
Oh, that's good.
but that was a relatively new thing. So I must have been 16. But that, you were just talking before how you used to have a line down the block.
Yeah.
On like Friday, Saturday night, Coconut Grove, at least when I was growing up, that's where you went.
Yeah, same. It was the same when I was growing up. It was like Thursday, Friday. It was just like a really like interesting mix of humans for sure, because this was like pre Wynwood, and like downtown you still didn't really go there, and Brickell was like not what it is now. So
Right.
like the Grove just had like all of Miami ascend to the Grove.
Yeah.
So it
Major
was-
police presence. Major.
Yeah, no, you're
Friday
right.
and Saturday, and they had paddy wagons standing by.
Well, I mean, that's back when Fat Tuesdays was here, and what was Wet Willies and Fat Tuesdays.
Senor Frogs, was that still
Senor
going when you were
Frogs
here?
was down. Now we're that they built a building there, but it was next to where because Green Street's been there for 35
Yes.
years. So next to that there was a building. That's where Senor Frogs was, and I remember they used to let underage people in. I don't know how I know that, but I do know that. And yeah, I mean the Grove is just what I say all the time is that this is one of the most historic neighborhoods in Miami, and it's also the last like walking city in Miami. Like you have no problems walking around here. Like downtown is somewhat getting there, I think, slowly but surely back to that point. But I mean the Grove, you just park and you can spend literally all day here. And also like, and not, I don't want to poo-poo anyone, but like back like when Scotty's was there, I mean, to me, it was like it's my favorite place on the planet, Scotty's. And, sadly it's not there anymore, but just stuff like that. Like the Grove was just like, had like trickles of that everywhere, It's a little different now, better or worse, whatever, however you want to think about it. But the Grove is still awesome. I love it here.
Yeah, and what people don't know who visit, because all you really do is these main thoroughfares, right? You do Main Highway, you go to Cocoa Walk and all that. But the residential areas just off of here, it looks
crazy.
exactly the same way it looked. I mean, when I was growing up, but probably long before that,
Yeah.
and it feels very much like, it almost has like a Hollywood Hills kind of feeling. It's all kind of overgrown and lush, and it's old Spanish style houses.
Yeah.
And it's really, a good chunk of geography that's completely residential. And it's I had friends there when I was growing up, and I always found that area very sort of like kind of an area out of time.
Yeah. And it's still exactly the same.
I know.
I mean, there's nowhere to build anything else there unless you knock it down and build it back up, which they're not a huge fan of. But like when you drive through there, the homes are trapped in time for sure. I mean, there's some parts of Miami that are like that, but the Grove by far is the one that has stayed like that. I think it'll stay like that for a very long time. So this is amazing. How many chefs have you actually spoken to, written about? And I was actually like reading a thing a couple days ago, and I never really realized how you were part of writing the Gotham cookbook.
That was my big break.
And that was like that. I remember as a young cook, I read that book, and I have poured through that book so many times. I mean, Portale is like for me, I loved, and even now, like I still refer back to it all the time. And it's one of those things to me. It's one of the most legendary cookbooks, at least that I have in my collection for sure. I don't know, like. So when did this first start?
For me?
Yeah.
Well, the writing started, the writing about chefs and food started with that book. So it's really weird. I always forget. I believe the book was either published in 97 or 98. I think 97, because I was working on it in 96. Yeah. And I was trying to be a screenwriter, and I had a day job at a PR firm that specialized in restaurants. And one of my clients was Alfred Portale, who at the time was the chef of Gotham Bar and Grill, which is it's still there. It's a new owner now, and Alfred's not affiliated with it. But he was there for 30 some years, and one of the really important new American cuisine restaurants of the 80s and into the 90s for sure. Super influential. And Alfred knew that I was a writer in my off hours. And it's a longer story than this, but he ended up asking me to collaborate on that book with him. And honestly, I just thought it'd be something to do. It'd be a one-time thing. And I think you're of the generation where for a time, if I would go to a chef's office to interview them, like every chef had that book.
This episode of Pan Con Podcast is brought to you by Perla Specialty Roasters. Perla produces an award-winning coffee portfolio. They are a 4-time Good Food Award finalist and 2-time winner. Perla uses coffee directly sourced from around the world using relationships on the farm level. They view their coffee portfolio as a way for coffee partners like Ariad Hospitality Group to further enhance their guest experience.
I really love what their brand represents from a local standpoint. They're very immersed in the community, and they've been very supportive of all of our places, even before we used to serve Perla. So when we decided to partner with them and make them our coffee provider across the board, they've been great to work with.
And with such intention placed on the food and bar program, shouldn't your restaurant have the same attention to detail? Their espresso fino blend was specifically designed to pair great with milk, making it amazing for latte or cortadito. Perla's biggest competition is the large, soulless, multinational roasting operations. You like that, soulless?
It's so good. It's like the final boss. You have to beat the soulless,
The big
multinational
fucking Folgers
roasting-
monster or something.
roasting operations. It's like a Maxwell House thing walking up to you. It's good.
They can also solve equipment needs with sales, leasing, and service operations available at their disposal. With lightning fast order fulfillment, orders roast and ship the same day. Sometimes Chug's Diner gets its order the same day the coffee was roasted.
I can 100% say that that's actually happened more than once. From a customer service standpoint, they're pretty incredible to work with for sure.
With initial and ongoing staff training to make sure that their coffee is tasting on point.
Yeah, I think there's 2 points there that are incredibly true just because I've lived them. It's like when it comes to equipment issues, how willing they are to help us in the maintenance standpoint of equipment, because coffee equipment, unless you have years and years of knowledge, you have no idea how to even start. And then the ongoing staff training, it's something that they talk about with us several times, whether they want to come in and do training us on how to make the coffee or just education on the coffee. They've been really great.
To get all of your coffee situation on point, drinkperla.com. That's drinkperla.com, drinkperla.com, to get your coffee situation on point and move away from those soulless operations.
Maxwell House, big boss.
Not so much now, but that's normal.
Yeah.
But at that time, for several years, and it had gold cover,
Yeah.
so I could always spot it on people's bookshelves, and like everybody, I mean, that had everything to do with Alfred and very little to do with me, to be honest, because Alfred was such a big figure at that time. But we won one of the 2 big cookbook awards. We were nominated for a Beard Award. We got great reviews, and I thought, this isn't the kind of writing I want to do, but maybe it's a way to not put on a suit and tie and have to be somewhere at 9 a.m. every day and
Man, amen to that.
manage employees, and that's how I started. But that's the first thing I ever got paid money for as a writer. And like I say, I didn't know it was at the time, but that ended up being that was the big break for me. And then around the time of the release and those awards and everything, I left my day job and I started looking for other projects, and that was 25 years and 30 something books ago.
Wow.
A lot of collaborations. I've been doing collaborations plus my own stuff. I started doing my own stuff 14 years ago, finally. Kind of gave up the screenwriting dream and went all in on the chef thing. So
What got you to switch over to just want to do your own stuff? Was there like a point that you were like,
in terms of the books?
yeah,
Yeah, there was a moment. So I refer to myself not as a food writer, but as a chef writer.
I love that. Thank you.
Because I really don't, I've written a lot of cookbooks, but I haven't written a recipe in over a decade now.
Yeah.
I still get a lot of calls from young people looking for advice because I did so many of them and they're still out there. But I started moving into helping people, with memoirs and things like that. And I did a book a while back called Don't Try This at Home. I collaborated with an agent by the name of Kim Witherspoon, and it was kitchen disaster stories from famous chefs.
Love that.
And
I got one of those.
I ghosted 28 out of the 40 stories in the book, and I had a really, I don't want to say easy, but I didn't need the chefs to like explain terminology to me. I didn't need them to, I could fill in context, and I started realizing that I had attained a certain amount of knowledge of the life, never having worked in a kitchen myself. And then I wrote a book called Knives at Dawn, which was about the Bocuse d'Or competition. And I trailed the American candidate, who's now very successful on his own, Tim Hollingsworth, who has the restaurant Otium in Los Angeles.
He's pretty
killing
amazing.
it. Yeah. So Timmy was the protagonist of that book. At the time, he was a sous chef, and he was developing dishes for competition. And there again, I was sort of watching him kind of like a Polaroid picture kind of evolve in front of me. And then the moment happened, which was there's a chef named Gavin Kazin who used to be in New York. He's now back home in
Also
Minneapolis.
legend.
He's like a mogul. He's got like
He worked for Danielle, right?
oh, for years.
Yeah.
And
Also part of the Bocuse d'Or team, right?
he is one of the big reasons that the U.S. has medals now, because
Yeah.
he was the one who pushed. He and the late Paul Bocuse pushed Danielle Boulud and Thomas Keller and Jerome Bocuse was already sort of involved, but he's the one who kind of helped push those people to take a leadership role in the U.S. effort. But I was having dinner with Gavin at a restaurant called Veritas, which is no longer there in New York City. Scott Bryant was the chef.
My old boss worked at Veritas.
Oh, really?
The Life of Brian, probably one of the best chapters ever written about food.
Yes, in Kitchen Confidential.
Yeah.
So, but I was at the bar, and Sam Hazen at the time was the chef, and Sam comes over, and he says, "I heard you're using Mangalista pork. Why do you like it?" And Gavin kind of told him why he liked it, and this is during service, right? And then 2 minutes later, Sam comes back out, and he has like the shrink wrap styrofoam bottom package of the pork. And he goes, "Chef, look how much fat there is. Look how much fat I'm paying for. How do you justify that?" And Gavin says, "Well, I cook. There's an appetizer we do at the bar, a snack, and we cook it in the fat."
Amazing.
Right? So we're actually marketing the fat. We don't call it that, but
Right.
And probably Mangalista pork spiced something or whatever.
Right.
And all the customers are looking at the three of us, and I realized this is totally normal for me, but I'm not one of these guys. I'm just this person who's like, always on the edges of it. But I've been privy to so much stuff, and that was the moment where I thought I should stop talking about food. I should start going all in on chefs.
Right.
And because that was always something I loved. I never loved writing recipes, but I always loved being around people who do what you do. I loved being around kitchens. I loved the after hours thing.
Same. Too much.
And I always liked ghostwriting. Every cookbook by a chef has an introduction where they kind of tell their life story.
Yeah.
Like they encapsulate it. And I always loved writing that, like interviewing them, trying to understand what made them tick, trying to really get to like who they were on the plate is the way I put it. so I decided to start putting on that knowledge, into the service of my own stuff.
Right.
And that's why, so I mean, the last book I did was called Chefs, Drugs, and Rock and Roll.
I know.
It was a history of, how the American chef movement started. And then this new book I have called The Dish is kind of celebrates the entire workforce, profiles line cooks and dishwashers and farmers and delivery people. So it's just a world I love. I'm probably in it for good. So that's a long answer, but that's
I like that.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
I think that like obviously I have a lot of cookbooks, right? I take after my mentor. Like Norman has probably 20 times the cookbook collection that I have, but like I love them, but I think the idea of writing, forget about a cookbook, just like writing a recipe for a cookbook is such a convoluted idea, right? Because I think food, first of all, it's going to change no matter where you are in the country, right? The product that you can get, but also the story and the feeling behind it. And I was trying to explain to someone the other day how to braise oxtail, right? And like, for me, it's like a religious experience, braising oxtail, because I grew up with it. It means so much to me. It's like a whole day long thing for me. It's an event, like you're not just going to braise oxtail and it's like you're just going to cook it. It takes a lot of effort and a lot out of you. It's very hard to put that into words, like on writing. And
I
then
agree.
Also to like consume that and to understand it and how deeply it means to somebody it's very difficult. That's why I love the storytelling aspect of, what really gets like how to understand the chef is like how you understand their food. I always say that like when you eat our food, it's like having a conversation with me, right? And I think that a lot of that, it's very much like a feeling thing, and when you write recipes, I have such a hard time writing recipes. Like
Most chefs do.
It's just such a challenge, right?
Yeah.
Because like, how do you, when you just look at numbers and words on a page, it doesn't really like evoke the feeling of what this really should have for a guest.
Do you know what Thomas Keller's line on this is? You must have the French Laundry Cookbook. Of
course.
Okay. If you go take a look at the beginning of it, he talks about, feeling free to make the recipe your own, if you want to add a little more of this or whatever.
Right.
And what he says is recipes have no soul.
Right.
Right? And
Right.
I love that. It's such a simple line, but I think that says what you're saying, right? Like that thing that you cannot, yes, what is the feeling? Or, you as a cook might bring a little something extra to it, just the way you season or, like I traditionally, I don't use recipes that much anymore, but when I used to use cookbooks, I always added one more clove of garlic than the recipe said. Always, before I even tasted it, because I knew I was going to want it.
Because obviously we have a good amount of properties that I have to have recipes for all the properties or whatever, and a lot of times I'll come into a place and the majority of my cooks are young, and they'll be doing a dish, and I'll ask them like, "Do you know what this means? Do you know why you do this? Do you understand?" Or even like, do you know where this dish came from? Do you know why it exists? Like all that stuff. Just because I think that if they have some kind of relationship with it, it will benefit the end result every single time, over and over. Like, oh, this chef told me that this needs to mean this, or this came because of this, or this happened because of this. Because for me, like, I have a very hard time just doing food to do food. I think that there's a lot of chefs that are incredibly talented that could be like, oh, I have to do this thing, I could do this thing. Needs to have some kind of like emotional attachment for me to really feel like super pumped about it. Like I need to, because if not, it's just like, you just feel like you're doing this like black and white corporate thing, and that's not why I ever got into this. So I don't know. I feel like the idea of like I've always it's always been a challenge for me, like writing a recipe, but then like how do I get this over to someone and get them to like understand how meaningful it really is, and I guess that's like the story behind Ariete Forever. Ariete's got like very few recipes at all whatsoever. It's a lot of like conversation and working through food and like taste points over and over and over again, and also like just the end result, like how does it feel to eat it in the dining room, so on and so forth. It's really an interesting topic is people always hit me up all the time like, hey, how do you do this? And I'm like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I know, but like, how do you want to do it? You know, it's a lot of that, and it's a challenge. I've always felt it to be a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite recipes that I have at home, there's a chef in New York City. Well, he hasn't had a restaurant in New York City in a little bit, but Tom Valenti, who had a lot of great restaurants over the years. And he's a friend of mine. We did 3 cookbooks together. And he had always told me about this Thanksgiving stuffing recipe that he had. And one year I called him. I said, I'm making the stuffing this year. I need the recipe. And he told it to me over the phone. And it wasn't like, this much of this much of this. You know, he was like, okay, you're gonna take some day old bread, cube it. If it's not a little stiff, you're gonna put it in like a 200-degree oven. Just prop the door open with a cork or something. So so it's like even lower than 200. You know, so it's gentle. And and then he's like, you're gonna put it in a bowl, and you're gonna add some stock, and you're gonna add some this, some that. If you don't like celery, you can leave out the celery, and then there's one place where he says, then season the hell out of it, So I have these notes, and they say these things like season the hell out of it, or add enough till it feels like this.
Right.
Because his stuffing recipe, at some point you either put on gloves or put your hands in, Glad sandwich bags and like knead it, right?
Yeah.
And I love that recipe. And if you look at old cookbooks, there's no cooking times.
No.
There's a guy in New York, restaurateur. He used to kind of be the prince of the city, Pino Luongo. Do you know that name?
No.
So back in the 80s and 90s, Pino had La Madre, Coco Pazzo. Actually, Tony Bourdain once worked for him at Coco Pazzo Teatro before Tony was Tony. Il Toscanaccio, Mad 61, where Mark Strausman got famous. He had a place called Sapore de Mare in East Hampton. I mean, he was at the same time. I mean, he was a mogul, restaurant mogul. Pino's first cookbook was called The Tuscan in the Kitchen. And it was notorious at the time because it did not have cooking times. Cool. It did not have quantities for certain things. And it was a lot of do this until your nose tells you it's ready.
Right.
Or do this until it looks the color of whatever, you know who loved it though? Food writers, because they were like, that's how you cook,
right.
But that book should be a classic, and it was ahead of its time, but that's, I forget the exact word, but the original, recipe, I think originally comes from a word that meant receipt, and it was basically a list. It wasn't what we now think of a recipe.
Right.
It was just like, here's what you need to make this thing,
Let me ask you so if you started doing this in 1998, 9, right?
7, 8.
Have you seen, it's 25 years, like what has been the biggest jumps, or like, have you seen certain portions over the last 25 years that you've seen a lot of change in food or chefs' ideology or, approach? I feel like approach and has changed a ton. Like I love old school food. Like that's like the things that really like excite me. You mean
old school Cuban or old school French?
Old school French.
Okay.
I mean, it's really like the basis of everything. All Cuban food is all old school because it's never changed. So it's like,
I don't know if you can say that.
I mean, I
feel like you're the last person on earth who should probably say that.
Well, I'm just saying, like the from what I grew up with to what people commonly know as Cuban food is like it's never changed.
By the way, do you know this about me? Do you know that I grew up with a Cuban stepmother?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I grew up with way more Cuban relatives than I grew up going to, going to late dinner on Christmas Eve.
Oh, good.
And then the whole family would go to midnight mass, except for like me, my father, and my brother, because we're Jewish. And then my stepmother would come home, and we'd open presents at like 2 a.m. And I went to Thanksgiving dinners that had yuca and rice and beans on the table.
That's the only thing I really know.
Yeah, but I mean, just so you know, I grew up with I ropa vieja and picadillo and all that stuff. I grew up on that stuff.
See, that stuff hasn't changed.
Right.
That stuff is, we've made changes, but like it's just like that is old school Cuban food is old school Cuban food, and it's my favorite thing to eat on a daily basis, which I try not to, but you know, it is. But just like broadly speaking of like, let's say American cuisine, which is a melting pot of absolutely everything, right? Have you seen a change in approach, direction, chef ideology, all that stuff?
I mean, I could probably answer that for hours.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the first things that come to my mind. I mean, one is you just referred to the classics and you said you meant French cuisine. I don't think that's a universal answer anymore. I had a conversation several years ago. They're sadly about to close, but there's a restaurant called Contra in New York City.
Are they about to close?
Yeah, they're closing they're closing about a week from when we're sitting here. They're closing this weekend.
Wow.
Yeah. I just went in to pay my respects. I had dinner there last Friday. It's still great.
Yeah.
But the two chefs there, Fabian and Jeremiah, who own it, I interviewed them about 10 years ago when they were first taken off. And, you know, they're really young. Like at that time, I think Fabian was only maybe mid-20s and Jeremiah maybe was 30.
Right.
And, you know, I was said to them, you know, you must have guys working for you who are older than you. And they said, yeah. And I said, well, you know, historically, one of the things people would say about the chef, right, is the chef is the person in the kitchen who knows the most. Mm-hmm. And I said, you know, how do you guys feel like you know the most? They said, that's not the case anymore.
Right.
And I said, why? And they said, because we're not just cooking French food. Mm. You know, they said, we're cooking food that has stuff, influences, ingredients, techniques, you know, from all over the world. So we may have someone in the kitchen who lived in the Far East and they may put us onto something, an ingredient. They may show us a technique, you know, that might be cool. And that's cool. Like, we're not going to know every nation in the world, right? But that's what food is now, right? Mm. You know, everything goes. People are really interested. I feel like every 2 or 3 years now, you know, a different cuisine kind of comes into vogue. You know, like right now, Korean food is having a moment in the United States, in some cities anyway. Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, a lot of modern Korean restaurants, you know. The whole Middle Eastern thing happened a couple of years ago. You know, a lot of those places kind of happened. I just feel like every couple of years this happens. That was not the case years ago. You know, everything, like when I started to be around this stuff in the mid to late 90s, you know, the kind of reference points were all French, you know, and almost every bio you read of a chef, right? Even if they were cooking a different cuisine, right? They would say, I cook, you know, like, let's say it was a Chinese American. I cook Chinese cuisine with a French head, you know, or I cook Spanish cuisine with a French head, or, you know, Floyd Cardoz, I do Indian food with a French. Everybody described themselves like that, right? Because they were applying French technique to their food. And I just don't think that's required anymore. I don't think there's a level of formality that's implied in the food. You know, I think there's so many acclaimed restaurants. I mean, David Chang's partially responsible for this. You know, there's so many acclaimed restaurants where like guests and servers might be in t-shirts, you know, and the music might be really loud, you know, but it might have a Michelin star and it might have 3 stars from the New York Times. That could not have happened in the 90s. Yeah. You know, if you weren't a certain amount of fancy, right? You were only taken so seriously, you know? It was like, oh, that's a good, you know, that's when people used to use this word we don't use anymore, thank God. You know, let's go get some ethnic food, you know? Yeah. That's how people spoke. And what that meant was something that's not, you know, European-based, really French, you know, and a little fancy, you know, but now people can have huge successes and get lots of great press and be treated, you know, it's very common now to go to some, you know, benefit or something where people have tasting stations and you'll see like the Daniel Boulud's of the world and the John George's of the world. And then you'll see younger people, some of them have similar type restaurants, but some of them made their name in a food truck, you know? I mean, a guy like Roy Choi out in Los Angeles, he's respected by everybody.
Yeah.
You know?
I love that guy's food.
He also built something that I spoke to him in the early days of the lockdown in 2020. He built what he's built, this little fleet of food trucks. I think he has 3 in LA. A, the investment was minimal. B, the pricing is gentle to the customers.
Yep.
And C, he never stopped functioning. You
Yeah.
know, they changed a little bit how they would hand the food out of the window of the trucks and how the line was handled, but they were still posting where they were going to be. And meanwhile, we had a brick and mortar place in Las Vegas that had to close, during the lockdown. So, I think there are also global lessons from people like that. But I think. Anyway, that's one very broad answer. Obviously, the culture has changed.
Yeah.
Some people knew enough not to do this years ago, but chefs don't go out and get drunk with their staff, or do other things. And even the staff, in this book I just did, I have a moment where the team in the restaurant I write about comes into work on the first day of their work week, which was a Tuesday. And I say, like, this is not the old generation of chefs. They all look fresh. Like years ago, this. If you came into a restaurant on the first day of the week, people were coming in hungover. They look like crap. They're telling these crazy weekend stories. These people look completely wholesome. They have water bottles.
Yeah.
They have a skip in there. They look fresh as a daisy, all of them, to a person, right? So that's different for better or for worse.
It was last week, and we did an event here, and the person that was putting on the event, she comes up to me and she was like, "Could you do me a favor? Could you ask one of your guys for a cigarette?" And I'm like, "Nobody here smokes.
Yeah, right?
Not one."
Yeah,
Like, and I just, I think for me, I was like in a bridge time, but like before super healthy, and it's not all like that, but
No.
it has definitely changed a lot.
yeah.
Back to, you're crushing a bottle of Jameson and smoking a pack of Marlboro Lights pretty much every day.
Or the shift drink.
Yeah,
I
well,
mean,
that was like I just saw a lot of disasters with shift drinks.
No, but I don't know if younger people know. Like, depending on the restaurant, sometimes you could, it was just they'd bring a bunch of beers.
Yeah.
But some places, if they were profitable enough, like you could order a drink, and they, in the last half hour of service, you were brought an alcoholic beverage.
Yeah. While you're breaking down.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, man.
That was normal. That
Yeah.
was not like a outside the box thing that a handful of places did. A lot of places did that. So I think that's changed. I think there's an openness to new things. That's really important. I think younger chefs are open to everything. I don't think there's a snobism about certain cuisines that there used to be. I'd like to think it's a more evolved community in terms of, how people of different cultures, different, how women are received into the industry.
Yeah.
It's not even a young chef. I just ate at a restaurant in New York called Essential by Christoph. This great, they're gonna, I think, know his name now. He's been around a long time. He ran Robuchon's U.S. restaurants.
Wow.
He ran Laurent Tournedel's. He was the culinary director for that empire. He was at one point after Danielle, he was the chef of Le Cirque. Christophe, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, Balanca, I think, but he's French. And, little older than me, that generation of French chef. And after the meal, I don't want to name drop, but I was with Danielle Boulud, who hadn't been there yet and really wanted to go try it out. And we went down to see the kitchen. Now, this place hasn't been rated yet. I think they're going to probably get, I don't want to jinx them. I think they're going to probably get very well received by Michelin when the next edition comes out.
Cool.
But we went down to the kitchen, multicultural team, very young team, about 50% female,
Cool.
And I'm like, I was shocked. I'm like, I can't believe a guy like that has a kitchen that diverse, and I thought that was beautiful, I just think, I have kids who are in college. I have twins who are in college age now. They just don't have the hangups, at least that my generation had. I remember when Obama got elected, and me and my friends were like, this is unbelievable. Like, this is great. Like, whatever your politics are, just that this country got to that place. And my kids, they didn't even know what the big deal was.
Right.
It didn't strike them as anything unusual, know? So I think that's been a really good thing. And then I think right now it's not the food, but I think the way people are looking at different business models is really cool. And I think it's going to be, you can tell me what you think, but I think it's going to be part of the answer to the whole, everyone learned about how tight restaurant margins are in 2020 when there were places that couldn't make payroll,
right?
If they were closed for a week,
right.
Most people outside the industry had no idea. But, I look at, I just visited a restaurant called Birdie's in Austin, Texas. They just got Restaurant of the Year from Food and Wine.
Birdie's.
And there's a guy, so it's a husband and wife. Arjav is the husband. He used to work for Danny Meyer's group in New York.
Cool.
And his wife, Tracy, did also, but she's the chef. She was in the kitchens. Gramercy Tavern, a restaurant called Untitled. But they have this really cool service model, right? Where no reservations. When you come in, when you make, when you're at the front of the line, you come in at the podium, it's a little wider than normal. They have the menu there, and you've probably reviewed it when you were in line. You place your initial order, and then you sit, and then you're brought your food, but the food is like, serious food, like you would be happy to eat there. I was thrilled to eat there. It could have been food served in one of Danny Meyer's restaurants in New York.
Cool.
Once you've been served, if you want more wine, if you want some more food, then there's someone who can take your order. But they eliminate a whole layer of staff.
Right.
And I haven't aired it yet, but I interviewed Tracy, and she was explaining to me she doesn't even calculate out her food costs. Like, she has enough of a sense of where they should be, just intuitively, that she doesn't have to get that specific about it, because they have a comfortable enough margin there. Yeah. Yeah. Or something happened, they had a new child, and I forget the circumstance, but they needed to close for a week. Somebody got sick, and, they didn't have enough staff, and they were able to absorb a week of not being open, But we're seeing a lot of stuff like that now.
Well, models are changing every single day. Like, just like look at what delivery has done to restaurants in general. Like, the way that the clientele base consumes information about food and where they want to go and how they want to dine and how they want to eat. All that has changed completely, I think, just over the last decade. And I think that, the more people understand about the business, the more it's going to continue to change. This is definitely not something that's going to be like change completely overnight. Old school kind of like restaurant nature is going to be around for a long time, but like every day there's a new model that works a little bit better than the old one, because I think everyone who kind of pines for it to be completely changed overnight, it's just not possible.
It never happens that way. I always say baby steps.
Right. And people are just like, well, the model is so archaic, and so but it's been around for a very long time.
But it's but it's changed in small ways that people,
for sure,
you don't necessarily like. Every time you talk about it, I just started teaching a course in like chef and restaurant history at the CIA, the Culinary Institute of America. And every change you could describe through restaurant history, it all seems very quaint now, right? And people are like, what's the big deal? Like these restaurants that opened in New York by Americans in the early 80s, the fact that the menu was not in French. Now, who thinks that's a big deal? Now if it's in French, you're like, oh, I got to ask the waiter to explain 5 of these things.
Right.
Okay. But that was a big deal, But you say this to people and they're like, well, what? Who cared? People cared, like these little things. But that's how the big things finally happen. You can't just go change everything whole cloth like overnight. People
I
need to get used to that kind of stuff.
I think just like restaurants, I could talk about like kitchens specifically, going back to how much like the culture of a team has changed so much. And it always starts at the top, right? Because like the way I always try to explain to my chefs that have their own teams is like, you can be the chef and you can have standards. It's the way that you relay that to your staff and the kind of culture that you're trying to create. Like, we can't, I worked for some absolute terrible humans. Like, plates thrown at me, paella pans thrown at me, burning me with spoons, like the whole thing.
Can
right?
we just say when you say that, you're not exaggerating for effect. These things really happen.
Oh no, they really happen.
Yeah.
And my thing is, like, I suffer from, like, I very much love great food. So I am a jacked up human being by nature. And I have to tell myself all the time, you need to fucking relax. You need to fucking chill. And it's the way that we talk to people and the way that we get them to understand, like, what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it. And that's what I try to explain to all of my chefs is like, be stern and be honest, but be honest. Don't be an asshole. And there's a difference.
Yep.
Be honest of why we're doing something wrong. All the way from like service, all the way to how we execute food. And it's like, just that conversation alone, we couldn't have before. Because before it was like the chef said whatever the fuck he said, and that's the way it's got to be. And like, it's also like, I can tell you, up until 8 years ago when I opened, I never heard a chef tell me that they fucked something up. Never in my life. And I try to like,
but you saw them do it.
Absolutely.
They just didn't acknowledge, and everyone knew it.
Right. And it's like, the other thing now is it's okay to fuck things up. That's part of life. That's just the reality. So I also make it a point when I make a mistake, whether I'm working expo, working a station, ordering food, whatever. Guys, I fucked this up. I apologize. I'll be better. Just having that conversation beforehand couldn't happen. It was always just like,
it was seen as weakness.
For sure.
And there was and the ego involved.
I think now the weakness is not being able to do that. Like, that's an incredible weakness. Forget it. Like, there's so many layers too. It's like, I've been berated by chefs that have been like incredibly demeaning and just like, this is why your girlfriend doesn't like you. And I don't understand how you have friends, all that shit. And it's like, dude, how the fuck did we get here? How did you get here as a human? Right? It's okay to be super passionate and like love great food, but it's just like all that in between stuff. Once we opened Ariete, I always said, like, yeah, I'm super hot headed, but we're never going to get back to that point. Like, the idea is to change the culture about like just the way we communicate with each other. And it's also like, I have a tendency also to lose my temper, and I will pull my team outside and apologize for losing my temper. And I do that all the time. And it's like, it's because beforehand, when a chef lost their temper, that was just the way it was.
Yeah.
And you had to just eat it, and you just had to deal with it. And it's like,
well, you still have the pressure, right?
Right.
That, you still have the pressure of a service, right? And some, it's funny. Well, first, can I ask you, when you became a chef when you became a chef for the first time, or maybe even when you were a sous chef for the first time and you had people, quote unquote, under you, right? Mm-hmm. What kind of a transition did you have to put yourself through? In other words, you had all these terrible role models on this level. When you first, were given the reins, did you act that way yourself and have to change? Did you even realize at that point in time that was messed up?
Yeah, when I was like my third sous chef job, I would say was probably my hardest job ever. And we won't get into names or whatever, but the one thing I realized is that I was like the bridge between this like it almost felt like a dictatorship. It was just like really, anything was wrong. It was just an absolute nightmare. And then there was my team that was incredibly talented, super young, and fighters. Like, it was a bunch of, it was 2 female chefs and 4. It was, I think there was 6, 7, maybe 7 of us all day, including myself. And it was like, they were bangers, really good, super young. I think all of us, including myself, were cooking a style of food that we weren't super familiar with. Working for like a big New York chef, and just it's a different world from how like Miami prepared you. Miami didn't prepare you for that style of food. It just didn't until we started cooking it every day. And I've stayed close with everyone on that team. Like some of them are like my closest best friends.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about it all the time. Water cooler talk is what I call it. And they're just like, like you shielded us. You were like the bridge. This is why we stayed. I mean, that team was together for almost 3 full years, which is like an eternity in restaurants. And that was the first time I kind of understood kind of my goals and my passion about changing the kitchen culture thing. I also came from playing like organized sports. So I understood it a little bit more, like how to build a team, how to build a culture, how to build camaraderie, how to build understanding. But also at the same time, and that was when I was 6. Also at that time, I realized when you take on that much of a burden, right, as a sous chef, whatever it may be, you start to like slice up your personal life. And so like this is where I always have issues with like the work-life balance stuff, right? Because then you're putting so much of like your personal effort and like your personal passion towards humans. Forget about food. We're not even talking about food now. Changing like this culture that's been around forever. And now it's like bleeding into your personal life because people will call you just to talk and be like, hey, this happened. My girlfriend left me, my mom, whatever. And now you're like this, not only like their boss, their friend, someone they confide in. It's a huge responsibility. And I think at that point is when I realized that like this thing is a lot bigger than just cooking food. And I mean, I love that part, but, and I've said it for a long time, the people make the place. If the people aren't in a good place, the food will never be good. And that's when I think because I used to be like, incredibly crazy, right? Like, and I was just kind of like learning from what I was being shown, like in kitchens, paella pans and whatever, the whole thing. But then I realized if I wanted to do something different with food and the culture of like a restaurant group, I had to be different. I had to approach it different. So I think that's, the pressure, like how the pressure mounts on you that adds a whole other different layer of problems. But when you start to understand the culture that you want in your kitchen, I think is the most important thing.
Did you have one moment that was like, in this area, like your rock bottom? Did you have one moment where you saw the impact of your, how you were talking to people or treating people and you thought, I got to turn this around?
Man, it depends, like as an owner or not as an owner. Because there's been several rock bottoms. And I think there's the mental standpoint of being a chef, working for someone else, paying the bills, and then being a chef for your absolute everything livelihood.
Yeah.
It's 2 different rock bottoms.
Interesting.
Like I think that when I worked for other people, I don't quite think that I thought I hit rock bottom. But I didn't really know what that felt like until I actually hit it. And
you mean when you became an owner?
Yeah. And I think it's because it was like complete livelihood at that point. And I think that you get driven to a place that like you're completely alone and you feel like the whole world is against you because these people don't understand how important this plate of food is. And it's not, and it's now.
And that registers with you as people not caring.
Right.
Right?
8 years in, like, I get it. At that point, a year in, I didn't get it. And I remember there was one day, and I had such a band of misfits that were in my kitchen. I had like, my very, very best friend, Gio Fester, that is still with us, the only person that's been here with me since day one. We had another guy that was with us for a long time. His name's Matt Hawkins, super talented guy. He worked for Norman also, just like me and Gio did. And then the rest of them were like, just like misfits. Like these guys, bangers, but like they just didn't get it. And I remember we're in the middle of a service and I had taken my first day off in like, it's probably like 3 or 4 weeks. And it was a Thursday and I came up and the kitchen was just an absolute fucking disarray. And I hate that. I'm a controlled chaos kind of guy when it comes to kitchens. Like I know it's always going to be chaotic, but you can control the chaos. You just need to be smarter than it. And I remember I walked to the back because the area has like a little back area that now it's all built out, before it wasn't, and there was just a couple chairs there, and I just there's 2 rock bottoms here, and I just get all 3 chairs and I fucking annihilate them, break them on the floor, fling them 30 feet across, yelling at the top of my fucking young lungs, and I'm just like in tears. And I'm like, I don't know if I could fucking do this. Second part, which was actually 3 weeks later, in the middle of brunch. I had worked all 7 days, and I used to work a double Sundays for brunch, right? Because like year 2, we were very slow. Like, man, it was bad. It was real bad. And I remember working brunch, and 2 of my cooks called out, and it was just me and one other person, and we got annihilated. And I like, we got annihilated, but we survived. I've been in plenty of services like that. Like, it was hairy, but not bad.
Yeah.
You know, and brunch is always kind of hairy. That's just how brunch survives. And I had an anxiety attack after service. Walked to the back, and I just fucking, like, I've never felt the immense amount of pressure like I did at that moment, ever. You know, like years later, dealing with the whole like Michelin coming to Miami and you know, more business things, worldwide plague. Honestly, none of it felt like that one moment. And it was just because I was so fucking exhausted. I was so fucking hungover. I was like, you know,
Couldn't think straight.
At that point, I was like a pack and a half of cigarettes deep a day, bottle of Jameson a night a day. And it was like, I had never quite felt that rock bottom before. Even 3 or 4 weeks before, breaking a bunch of chairs, screaming at the top of my lungs, I was trying to just like not direct these things at people, just because they had always been directed at me so many times, because it's not really their fault. I failed. That's what every chef needs to realize. When the team fails, it's because you failed. It's not because they failed. It's because you failed, because you are the leader.
Well,
right?
to go back to your sports background, right?
Right.
They fire coaches when teams are losing, right? They don't fire a linebacker, or they don't
Right.
right?
And it's and like that. You know, I would think that the world changed slowly after those points, because like we were still in a really rough spot, and it took a lot of evolving. I mean, but that was 6 years ago. You know, and now, you know, it's restaurants, right? Everyone feels like the world's ending every day. You know, it's just the reality of it. Like every day there's a new piece of equipment that's broken, a cook that didn't show up. I don't know, the AC's broke. I don't know, there's a fucking laundry list of shit that happens. But it's like, all right, so, what do we can either complain about it or we find a solution.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality. It's like that. I think those are like the those rock bottom stories. Like they're still like in the back of my brain all the time, because now I tell people the goal is to not go back to stuff like that. You know, and I tell my team all the time, like, you need to lean on me, because I never want you guys to get there. I remember and it wasn't me, really. It was the area team. Week before Michelin happened was going to be announced, right? Man, it was like just the most amazing team that restaurant's ever seen. Fucking just like absolute dogs in the kitchen. Just like so caring. They loved each other so much. The food was so on point. You know, think about it from that team. We have 3 chefs now that are spread out from that team. From prep cooks to even the dishwashers. And just like I remember, I believe I was maybe here that night, and then I started my night here, and then I went over there and I just observed service for like the final like 2 hours. And I just saw it. They were like super edgy. They just were right at the edge. Like they wanted to be pushed off the edge. So I said nothing the entire service. Helped out, you know, nothing crazy. Last pickup of the night was a rough one. I saw them kind of like stumble. You could see some of the guys were just tired, overtly focused, so that just makes you tired. And my chef, which is he's been with me for like 3 years. I've known him for like 11 or 12. One of the most caring, hardworking, and talented people that I know, just storms out the back door. Same back door that I went out 6 years before. Oh my God. Throws his hat. He's not like a super emotional guy. That's my job. I'm the emotional guy. I'm the one that's very loud. He's like very quiet.
Fire and ice.
Yeah, he's he's sarcastically funny. I just think that I'm funny. So like, we're a great team, and he's super bent out of shape. So the team, we all break down together, then we go to the back and we just sit there for like 3 hours. I mean, we must have been there till like 4 a.m. And just like, you know, because they all wanted it so bad. And they all wanted to, because like, I love the dog mentality. Like, I just want to prove everyone wrong. Like, fuck all these people. Everyone says that we can't do this food and do it this way and do it this in this place. Wearing t-shirts, listening to hip hop or Spanish music or whatever. Everyone told us this shit wouldn't work. And then when we elevated, everyone told us that shit wouldn't work. So we want to prove them all wrong. And I told them, you've already done that. We've already done that. And I get it. The chip is nice, right? The chip is awesome. And trust me, I want it as bad as you guys. But we've already fucking done it. There was no one there for me 10 years ago saying, listen, you're already doing great. Chill. You got this. Never. And that's what I always think of as like the biggest difference from me today to 8 years ago. Like 8 years ago, I'd be like, yeah, I love that you guys care so much. Yeah, this shit's hard. It's cool. We've already done it, man. We're already here. Look at it, we're slammed. That's a blessing. Every single day. You guys weren't here when I used to do 2 covers a night and work the line by myself. You guys were not here for that shit. That was hard. This right here, we're lucky to be here. Fortunate. And what is luck? Preparation meets opportunity. My coaches told me that shit all the fucking time. And I think that like that dialogue is different. The like how we talk to people, how we care about people is totally different too. It's like, you know, these guys, they know I'll take the shirt off my back for them. And I mean that shit. They call me at 2 a.m. and they're in trouble. They know that I'll come get them. And it's like, you know, that's just not how I came up. You know, and I'm proud of us for that as a company, because that takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot. You spend a lot more money doing that than you do running a lot of places like when I was coming up. You know.
Yeah. Well, what you just said to me, that's so, and I've heard other chefs say it. You know, the 2 a.m. phone call. You know, if they're in trouble.
Yeah.
I mean, that says so much about the industry, right? Because there's the fact that you may have people working for you who may need to make a call like that at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
But then the fact that you'll be there for them, you know, and this is to me, you know, we had an event here last night as I'm sitting here with you. And at one point in the evening, we talked about mentorship, you know, and it's this thing that barely exists in any other industry anymore, you know, but you know, these people, you know, you like when you see Norman Van Aken, do you call him chef still?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if people understand how special that is, right? Because there's the person you're working for at a given moment. That's, you know, you call them chef, right? Mm-hmm. But then there are these people, you call them chef the way you call your parents mom and dad, you know, like for life. Those people are there for you for life. You can call for advice. Right. They'll come take a look at your new place and point out stuff maybe you're missing. They'll do anything, right? That's not a common thing in this world, you know? Look, I say it all the time. The industry has gotten so much negative attention in the last 10 years.
For sure.
And everything that's been written is true. And there were some bad actors that needed to, and they still are, who need to be exposed or needed to be exposed. But then there's stories like this, right? And I think there's so many people who have been saved by this industry. I think there are so many people who they don't fit anywhere else, you know, like they found cooking, kitchens, that world, and they're like, oh, like this I can do.
Well, it's Norman saved my career.
Your career,
without a doubt.
Because what, you were like teetering?
Well, it's you know, like I have a lot of love for that man. He taught me a ton. He taught me a lot of like out of the box thinking when it came to food. But apart from that, it was in a very dark place. This was like mid-20s, and you know, like I had gotten fired from a job because some ownership dispute, and my chef was scared to lose his job, and then basically I had gotten fired. Right? It's a very weird time, and I went on like this hardcore 3-day bender. Bad. That was probably one of the worst ones of my entire life. And before I had taken the job as the executive sous chef of that space. Norman had reached out to me. It was like, hey, you know, we're opening this thing. Would you like to come here? And me, like an arrogant little fuck, I was like, nah, I'm good. Right? So I don't know how I mustered the energy to do this. I emailed him back from that email and was like, you know, can you meet? And I walked into his office, which his office was just behind the kitchen. It was like open, you know. And I looked like shit. Absolute fucking trash. And he just looked at me and goes, are you okay? And I'm like, not really. Told him the whole story. They didn't have a job for me. He found a way to get me a job. And from that day to today, my career is completely different. Without that point, I would have never have gone to, you know, then work for Michael after. And then, you know, after that was when I opened up Ariette. So
Right.
like, it just was it like without that point, I don't quite know where I would have been next, you know? And he was just very open about like, you know, whatever you need, we're here for you. And it's just still to this day, like that conversation, I will say it saved my career.
And the amazing thing about you, the way you tell it, is he had enough presence of mind and had enough empathy
Yeah.
that he asked you if you were okay.
Right.
Right? You didn't come in and say, I'm about to lose it. I'm on the edge. He could tell.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Well, I mean, you know, like he, you know, at that point, Norman was at a different stage in his career because I've obviously heard like stories of young Chef Norman and how he was a hard ass and very tough. With me, he was always like very open, like more like just like an amazing teacher, you know, about cuisine and food and history. And I mean, he's like an encyclopedia of food anyways. So just like, it was huge. And that was the second time that I worked for him. The first time I worked for him, I was just a prep cook, and I left my resume like 15 times in an empty space. Finally got a call back. But it was, you know, this time was definitely more impactful, and it was just like, you know, I got to know a legend, and that time is pivotal to like where I am today.
Thank you for all that.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to take over with all these questions.
No, it's cool. I love it. I love it. You know, I just like I adore the idea of like understanding chef stories because they're always so multi-layered. You know, like every chef has such an interesting trajectory to like where they got, and service people in general, like a lot of times just food in general, right? Because like no one, I would say a lot of times, people don't grow up saying like, I want to be in the food world. You know, like it's just like, then it becomes this like incredible passion, and then you have this weird story of peaks and valleys of ups and downs to get you to like wherever you're at. That's partly why I love it so much, and partly why like restaurants to me, and I worry every day that we're going to lose the culture of just restaurants in general, right? Because like there's so many different walks of life, so many different backgrounds, and you can learn so much stuff from so many people that just walk. I remember like my first sous chef job, I was way too young. I had no fucking idea what I was doing. And then I had these two Haitian dishwashers, and they were like so incredible. And they would teach me something that I had no idea about every single day. And they were just like the sweetest people on the planet. And I remember when I left that job, 5 years later, I just saw them walking down the street. They cried. They gave me hugs. They were just like, but you know, like those kind of moments happen so often in the food world because you're like introduced so many different walks of life. And I just find it like beautiful, you know, and that's why when I say I worry about the food world, it's like, where is technology going to take us?
Oh, yeah.
Where's like, what is the next step for food? And everyone asks me all the time, and I'm like, I don't have time for that shit right now. Like, I just
Too busy working.
right. So,
Yeah.
like maybe in a couple years I could think about it a little bit more, but like all I care about is really amazing food and really great teams to go along with it, you know? So I don't know, man. It's like there's some people that do food because they think it's going to make them famous, 2 because maybe they just fell into it, and then 3 because they're incredibly passionate about it. about the food and the experience and the story behind it. And like for me, I like to consider myself the third. I did kind of fall into it, but like, you know, I'm super passionate about like the storytelling behind it, why it's happening, and does this food have a purpose? I feel that a lot. I worry about like the purpose part a lot because I feel like the more shitty restaurants we have, because there's a lot of shitty ones. Let's just be honest. There's a lot of big box trash that have no stories. The more people go to that shit, the less people are getting to like the really good places that have like amazing stories.
How do you, you know, you've got a bunch of restaurants. You got 2 more coming, yeah?
1.
Oh, I thought it was 2 more.
1.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you just open one? What did I just
Well,
read?
they're
I read
kind of
something
they're,
that said
they're
were
connected.
Okay.
Yeah.
2
So
concepts,
one is
roof.
like, so imagine if this thing had like windows that open and there was a bar
Got
that
it.
faced
Okay.
outside.
Got it.
But they're one and the same.
Okay. You know, and you talk about how important the storytelling is to you, right?
Yeah.
If you add up how many menu items you have at any given time, that's got to be
215.
okay.
Yeah.
How many stories do you have to tell? Like, are they all yours at this point? Do
I'm
some
running-
of them come from your team, or are you like rummaging through your memory banks all the time and finding, you know, new things to draw on?
So I'm running out of stories, but I would say that I think there was also like a good change over the last 8 years for me, that I used to feel like all of it had to come from me, right? And that is definitely no longer the case. I'm a big fan of like creation through collaboration, like everyone at a table. There's a reason why everybody works here. There's a reason why I want everyone to believe in this. And I also want everyone to feel like an ownership portion of this too. I want them to understand that, like, it's also like when we talk about food, I want them to understand the restaurant fully. So the food that they're presenting, as it goes time over time over time, they could present 10 dishes and 10 don't make it, but maybe the 11th one is when they finally understand what the restaurant means and the story behind it. And I think that just comes with time. You know, some other people that have been with me for long enough, they just kind of get it, you know? I'm also just blessed with the fact that I have like really talented chefs that just give an absolute fuck ton about great food, you know? And I think it's also like every place is completely different, which helps the story aspect. I remember when I was at Ariete and I was like, you know, I almost felt like a little handcuffed to like 30 menu items, you know, because I also like where we're sitting at Chugs, like the idea of like everyday food. I love that. And like, how can I impact the story of the Cuban American story through everyday food, which is more impactful really, because you can come here 3 times a week. And like, then I became infatuated with that idea. Then a place like Laurel came along and we're talking about like an ode to classic French cuisine, which is something that I very much love. It's like, how do we clean up like brasserie food and like make it a little more nouveau and like try to get people to understand that, which is a work in progress. But like also those chefs in that space, like they love that idea. And you know, now that space specifically, like they come to me with shit all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
And then the Gibson happened. And then, so like I'm a big believer in like a space has like every restaurant is like alive and it tells you like what it needs, you know? Yeah. And that space, it's down the street from where I grew up. I seen it be shithole after shithole after shitty dive bar after shitty college bar. And then finally I had a chance to take it and I'm like, man, all this space needs is someone to do it its justice. It's in this like really discreet corner of, you know, Coral Way and 22nd next to a bike shop and a gas station. But this neighborhood,
Is that right? That's near where the Latin America used to be? No?
That's a little farther down the way.
A little further down.
Yeah.
Okay.
And all it really needs is someone to like show it some love. So then I brought back one of my very best friends that we cooked at what I considered the best restaurant in Miami at that time. And we were like, we're going to do this shit like how we know how to do things. We're going to have 20 menu items. We're going to make all our pasta in-house. We're going to make charcuterie. We're going to do like, and just kind of like, you know, and the kitchen is like fucking small, you know, but he was like, yeah, let's fucking go. And then, you know, at that time, Chris Hughesby is incredibly talented, but he hadn't like directed his own ship yet. So like, you know, we talked through a menu. I put the first menu in place, but now he comes to me. He's like, hey, I think this is a good idea. What about if we change this, and this is coming into season, we do this? And then you see like somebody grow in their position, you know, which also was something that like for me, I felt like I didn't have. Once I took like a bigger role, I didn't have anyone to like kind of like push me along, you know? And I feel like hopefully I can be that for a lot of them, you know, like, and it's just kind of like how it's just happened. And now it's their story. Like, tell me about the story you want to tell. What are the things that matter to you? Why do they matter to you? And then how do we get the guest to understand the story also? And I think, you know, like something that's been really hard for me personally is like to not be like just like in the absolute trenches like every single day, you know, like that's like it's been the hardest thing for me to let go of, because the more that you're there and just kind of like in the trenches, the less opportunity people have to grow as a leader instead of just supporting them.
But also, that's what drew you to it in the first place, right?
Which part?
Cooking.
Well, I mean, honestly, like any
Like
day
you
that
said earlier, you work a station sometimes.
I mean, I still often, and my favorite days are the days that I'm just in one place the entire day, and I'm just in the kitchen the entire day, and we're just working through stuff, or just whatever happens, whatever station you need to work, whatever. Those are still absolutely, for me, like the most important days, because all the other stuff is my job, but that stuff is like what I love, and it's what, you know, like kind of just that team camaraderie, great food, working together, like that to me is, I think, what will keep me in this for like a really long time, because, you know, like people get tired. It happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, you know, you asked me that question before, what's different today? This is like kind of would just be a footnote. But the number of chefs I know of your generation and just a little bit younger who now make a point of
Oh yeah.
getting on a station, they don't want to let go of that. I
Right.
never saw that 20 years ago.
Really?
Never. I'm sure there were people who do it. Tom Colicchio does it. I just found that out recently. He sometimes likes to jump on the pasta station.
Wow.
He said his cooks don't love it when he does that, but
I'm sure they don't.
yeah, but but I get that, because Tom was always known when he was coming up as like, you know, like an animal in the kitchen, just like an amazing cook, right?
Right.
But no, I don't think that was a normal thing. But I know so many younger chefs now who they want to do it. They don't
Right.
want to let go of that tactile part of their job, their life.
Well, I also think it's what keeps you like creatively going, because the less you actually cook, like, you know, it's the same thing as like going to farms, talking to farmers, just like when you're on the line, like that's really the most connected you can be to food, you know. And if you're not doing that, it's like you could think a dish is good, but it could really not fucking work until you're on the line working through it, or just working through a station. I mean, I also worked for a lot of guys that would come up with what they thought was a great dish, and it would absolutely bury the line, and it would absolutely not be a good time. And I try my hardest to do that, to not do that anywhere. An area gets buried all the time, but all the other ones, they don't get buried very often. You know, it's just, you know, like, what fun is that? That's not fun for anybody, and they're not going to do a great job. Maybe 1 out of 5 will be great, but like,
Right. Save that for like the big wine dinner, you
Right.
know, where you're only going to put out 20 plates or something like that.
well, it's also like, you know, not everyone is like a Linea, like they have an army in the kitchen, you know?
Yeah.
And it's unrealistic unless you're paying, you know, $1,200 per person. Shit's not real. It's just, it's a facade.
Yeah.
It's not real restaurant world.
Yeah.
It's, you have to make it delicious and, you know, easily executable so you could do it 35, 40, 45 times in a night.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to take a break because I need a refill. Okay.
Okay.
Where did we leave off? No?
The very last thing was,
Yeah, I don't remember either. I've only had one Negroni, too. That's pretty good.
We have the technology to check, but we don't know how to use it.
No, I don't think it's that big of a deal. So, I guess, like, we've obviously talked about, like, what you've seen change in the last 25
Yeah.
years. What do you think is going to be something that you see change in the next 5 years?
I think unconventional restaurants are going to be, we're going to see more of that.
What's that mean?
Well, whether it's more food trucks, whether it's more, chefs functioning in different ways, right?
Sure.
I mean, some of this has already happened, right?
Yeah,
it just hasn't been observed. There are chefs now who are pop-up chefs.
Yeah.
That's what they do. They make their living doing it. And I don't think they're probably going to put themselves under the burden of owning a restaurant again. I think those are people who are very happy. The food truck thing, these different models I was talking about, like Birdie's.
Yeah.
I just think restaurants are going to go through a metamorphosis greater than anything you and I have experienced in our lives. Because for all the stuff we've talked about in this conversation, restaurants still look like restaurants.
Yeah.
What they're doing might be a little different. The food may have changed. The makeup of the people in the kitchen might have changed. The level of formality may have changed. Alex Stupak, who's a chef I know you know,
Yeah.
but who's a chef in New York. He has a group of restaurants. They all, well, not anymore, but most of them are under the Empeon umbrella, Mexican restaurants. He said this thing to me maybe 10 years ago. And I thought it was so smart, not just about that moment, but about the future. And he said, people just want the stuff. I thought that was the best line. Because he was doing, at that time, he had a bar in the East Village in New York. Mm-hmm. And they had he did a cheeseburger, he did tacos, and he did whatever. But then he had a tasting counter in the bar.
I love that.
And this is a guy he was the original pastry chef at Alinea. Mm-hmm. He worked at WD-50, serious background. And he said there's people who come in wearing Metallica t-shirts, and they're ordering expensive wine, and I'm cooking them very fancy food, but we're in a bar, right? And he said, and their attitude is, I just want the stuff. Well, once you have that recognition and once enough people out there buy into that, then how much of the other stuff do you need, you know? And so I think we're just going to see, again, it's already happening, but to the point we made a few minutes ago about baby steps, I think we've taken a lot of those baby steps. And I think, the tipping point is coming where, no, I'm not saying, most restaurants are going to still look like the restaurant we're sitting in right now, right? But I do think there's going to be a proliferation of restaurants that don't, like some people use the term restaurants without walls, I just think we're going to see things that are structurally different. They might be on wheels. They might just be a traveling chef.
Yeah.
And I think the terminology eventually may change, as it has for restaurants over time.
I just think that the idea of running a restaurant, opening a restaurant, building a restaurant is incredibly fucking expensive. And it continues to get more expensive every day. And it's I think that burden, I look back to 8 years ago and to where we're at now, I'm just man, I built that thing for a box of rocks compared to what we're sitting in and what we've built since then. It's just astronomical. And so I understand, you can see it happen every day, how the model of a restaurant is changing. But I also think that the hardest thing right now is the guest connectivity, right? Because there's so much in between it now. So social media, how that just becomes a lot of smoke and mirrors, and it's just there's so many more layers now.
How about the way you reserve?
Right. It's just in order to get people into your space, one, the competition is furious.
Yeah.
Right. Secondly, it's so now I think about it, for a new chef, they have to be a social media manager. They have to be their own PR company. They have to also build things. They also have to be handy, which I'm not. Then after all that, then they also have to run a kitchen. A lot of times they're going to have to learn how to run the front of the house. It's just so layered, And that's why, a lot of people come to me too. It's I have this idea for a restaurant. Tell me what you think. This is a space. And I just walk them through all the hurdles and then ask them okay, so what's the plan now? Because again, I want to be able to give people like the failures that I went through so that they can understand them before they get into it. Like, you have to think about all these hurdles to get to this point, you know, because there's a lot. I really do. I would have to agree that I think that the landscape of how restaurants come across is going to be completely different now.
Well, you know, let me ask you this. You were talking about how much it costs to build out a restaurant, right? And how much trouble it is. How much of that is just your own standard, right?
Yeah.
What you want, what you, you know, I want my self-respect and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And how much is it what the, you know, what you think the guest demands? Like, do you think, well, let me just leave it there. And then I have I'll tell you the follow-up.
That's I think about that question a lot because
this goes back to the stuff, right?
Yeah. So,
like, does the stuff have to come in a Tiffany's box?
No.
Or could the stuff come in a box you found outside a liquor store?
So, especially like Miami is a great example. There's restaurants in Miami that easily cost north of $15 million. When you walk, like now, I walk into them and be like, fuck, this is fucking crazy. Like, and I know because, you know, I bought these tables were actually incredibly expensive for me. You know, like those chairs, I still know how much they cost. Like all this stuff, right? Like, and then I go into these other places and they're just like $2,000 deuce table. Then you got to buy the chairs. We haven't even bought the lights, countertops, like all these things. And I look at it all. I'm like, first of all, how the fuck did we afford all this? Secondly, like, how are they going to get this money back? And two is this why people come here? Because a lot of times, and I'm not saying all the time, a lot of times, all that stuff, super nice. You go and the food fucking sucks. And the service is absolute trash. But like, is this what people want? Is this where I fucking missed the boat? You know, like, I ask myself that question all the fucking time. Because it's kind of infuriating. Because, like, again, a lot of chefs don't come with this gigantic bankroll, right?
Yes.
To spend $15 million in a space and do all these things. And it's just kind of like, and then you go there and then the end result is absolute trash. And I've had better meals. Like, you know, I think about the time that I ate at Animal in LA, right?
Loved that restaurant.
And it's just, it was a box with 2 paintings.
Yeah.
Right?
Bar in the back.
Bar in the back.
Yep.
Small kitchen.
Yep.
Food was delicious.
And totally unique.
Right.
Dishes that, they weren't riffs on other dishes. They
Right.
were like,
Right.
where did this come from?
And I always think about that too. It's like, we don't need a lot of shit. The food just needs to be great. And the service needs to be excellent. And it's like, yeah, but this is what I mean. Like, when I tell people that I love like old school restaurants, that's all I really mean. Service needs to be great. Food needs to be great. The other stuff, like, this is a beautiful restaurant. I love this place. But like this, I mean, this was not what other places cost. It just, period. And like, I know because I've talked to people. I'm just like, how did you, where did you get the money for that? Like, this was a stretch to do for us at the time that we built it. Yeah. And it's like, it fascinates me all the time. People just want the stuff. Make the stuff great. And how they get the stuff too is also important.
So here's what I was gonna. This is my follow up, right? Maybe it's not even a question. I'll see if it ends with a period or a question mark. But there are people I think about when I ask the question, and there are people I think about when you were just talking about this $15 million build out. You know, by your estimate. There is a restaurant group in New York. They've been getting a lot of press, and they deserve it. They're amazing guys. But these guys have a company called Unapologetic Foods. They're doing Indian restaurants all over New York. Cool. They have a place called Dhamaka. They have a place called Ada. They have a place called Sema. They have Rowdy Rooster, which is an Indian fried chicken sandwich place.
Man, that sounds delicious.
And they have a place called Masala Wala and Sons in Brooklyn, and they have 3 more places on the way. And they are like on fire, right? And I'm actually dying to get them on the show again, just to talk about this. But I had a realization recently. I'm in one of their restaurants, and I looked around, and I'm like, they barely spent money on this place. You know, they put on a coat of paint.
Yep.
Ronnie and Chintan, if you're listening, I mean this in the best possible way. But they don't, that's not where they're making the impact, you know?
Right.
their place Damaca is very nice. It's a new building and all that.
Right.
But they don't go crazy, you know? And then I think about, I don't know if you know, I've heard of, I've never been there, the restaurant Michelin in San Antonio, Texas.
No.
It's these two guys, Diego and Rico. One is from Texas and one is from Mexico.
Cool.
And they're best friends. And they have actually moved into a brick and mortar location, but their original, so they do, it's a Mexican tasting menu.
Cool.
And Mixtli, M-I-X-T-L-I, means cloud. And the idea is like it's a cloud that passes over Mexico, right? So I forget how many times a year they do it, but they pick an area of Mexico. They do tons of research on the food of that area, and then they do a tasting menu based on that. So that's how it changes periodically. They opened that restaurant in an abandoned railway car
Cool.
for $15,000
Wow.
because they had both grown up with not much money. They had both been in debt. One of them had their car repossessed at one point. They were unwilling to take on any debt. And when they first opened, like one of their cooking surfaces was a hot plate from Walmart, literally. Okay. They had no debt. They were in the black after a
Right
couple of
away.
weeks of service. Yeah. Yeah. And they are huge there. They are huge. And I think I don't want to say what they've won or not won, but they've gotten a lot of national attention. One of them
Good for them.
was on an episode of Padma's television show.
Oh, cool.
Like they've done great, right? I don't think it's essential. This is the thing. Like it used to be, right? But I think the public has gotten past, at least in a place like Miami, a place like, in a big, in a big progressive city where, people have kind of kept up with the times.
Right.
I go back to what Alex said. They just want the stuff. So if you have a staff that knows how to take care of them, and you have great food, and you have a good vibe, right? I don't think you need the build out like that. I think people will accept. I'm not saying you can just go into a garage and do nothing,
Right.
But I don't think you need to bring on a name designer and
Right.
and have all this custom made stuff. I think that's exciting.
I think it's so I look at Miami because obviously I know it super well. There's like two groups of people. One group really loves all that stuff. The sexy fishes of the world, the big box restaurants that are like millions of dollars and smoke and mirror and like
Nightclubs with food.
pretty much. And they love that shit. And that's where they want to go.
Yeah.
And they want to pay $1,000 for a shitty steak. And they want to do all that stuff. And that's totally fine. Those
Yes.
are not my clients.
Right. No, I've been using that phrase, by the way, for decades. NWF, nightclubs with food. It's a legitimate term.
It is 100%. And Miami is like, I don't know. I don't know about other places, but Miami's got so many of those.
Oh, sure.
Just so fucking. And they just, when people it's a new press release out and a new copy and paste article about the press release to a piece of thing that hit the internet and just what this restaurant is. It's all this. The restaurant, it's a nightclub. It's a nightclub. They have food. Strip clubs also have food. It's not necessarily the same, and then there's another portion of people that I think the way that Miami has grown over the last 30 years when it comes to food, that really, really, really appreciate what a lot of people in Miami are doing, right? What people, the food that Norman was cooking and Douglas and Michelle and how they kind of paved the way. I think there's a lot of people now that really care about the smaller restaurants that they just want the stuff that's really good,
Yeah.
And that's why you don't need the super fancy build outs because people are going to come if the food is good. And I think there's a lot of places in Miami that are like that now, as opposed to before there wasn't so many.
Well, there's also there's cachet in that, right? If you can pull it off with style, then you're the coolest kid in the class, right?
Agreed.
If you're able to do something on a shoestring and make it quality,
Right.
but it's in a place that has one light bulb in the middle of the room,
Right.
or whatever you're doing, or it's all lit by whatever you're doing, right? Or it's in a space where
Well, it's like how Ludo also had the
yeah,
you know
Petit Trois.
Right.
Or Tuamek.
Tuamek.
Yeah.
Petit Trois was a place next door.
Yeah.
With like the best omelet I've ever had.
It's a cool place.
Yeah, it was just
It's the
that.
least LA restaurant in LA.
I mean, it's so fucking good though, man. Like
It's great, but it's the heaviest meal. I mean, it's
That's
when I
also
first
true.
went there, I'm like, I cannot believe I'm about to walk out and I'm going to be in LA.
and it was just, I mean, that was an incredible meal. But again, that's like a small shopping plaza, you know?
Yeah.
I think that's a direction that Miami has gone into because I don't quite think it used to be like that.
No.
You
I mean,
know?
when I was growing up here, I don't even know if it was the same for you, but when I was growing up here, Christie's
Oh man, Christie's is
for
still
prime
there.
prime rib and
Christie's
a Caesar
is
salad.
still there.
The Forge on Miami Beach.
Not
There was a place called not Calliope, but something like that over in I can't remember the name now. In the Gables, near Miracle Mile, but off Miracle Mile. Anyway, you know, there were like they were all. A lot of them were French.
Yeah.
You know, and that
or a
was where-
steakhouse.
and that's where you went before the prom, or that's where your parents took you. You know, like. But there was nothing cool. There was nothing cool.
Yeah, I mean Norman's was like the coolest.
Yeah.
You know, and then obviously Chef Allen's. And
Yeah.
there was just a few. Now
Yeah.
there's like a lot, and that's great. I mean, that's good for us and like the development of food in this city and like just more people who just want the good stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's like incredibly important because, again, I always talk about area because that was the most like vivid memory I have of like just not. We really had nothing at that point, and just like resanding the tables that we had, resanding the bar top we had, bunch of old equipment, saute pans, whatever, and it. Thankfully, it worked out after a while, but it still took time, and it was like. And now it's just you see like all these big box restaurants from everywhere, all over the place, locally and from not local people, just like continue to pop up, and you walk in there like, what? This is one fucking huge. Two, how the fuck did we afford this thing? Like this is crazy, you know. So I don't know. I always tend to like the smaller the restaurant, and just like that's really where I prefer to eat. Always. I think a lot of chefs would probably agree.
Well, you know, it's funny. Living in New York, right, where real estate is so crazy.
Right.
I was just in Chicago where my book is set. I was there for the publication day, and I did an interview. And someone said to me, "What do you think? How do you like?" A journalist asked me, "How do you like the Chicago food scene?" And I said, "I absolutely love it." I said, "But as with many cities, I constantly." You know, I walk into restaurants here and I almost have like agoraphobia. You know, I'm like,
Right.
this is so big.
Right.
I mean, we have a few places like that in New York, but not many.
Yeah.
You know, and I live in Brooklyn, and the Brooklyn food scene is amazing. And it's like 30, 40 seat restaurants, you know?
Right.
And a lot of them are DIY, you know, like they were built by the chef owners, you know, or maybe their parents came and helped. Or, you know, yeah, it's interesting where we are. Can I ask about Ariette, though?
Sure.
You know, I look at your menu once in a while online, and I was just saying what was inconceivable when I was growing up, right?
Right.
There's stuff on that menu. If you would, first of all, I wanted to know what it was. But when I was a kid, no, but like venison tartare.
Yeah.
Like I see that on a menu in the town where I grew up, or the city where I grew up, and I'm like, how can he sell that? You know, you have the duck press, right? Were these hard sells, stuff like that, when you first opened your doors? Or was there enough of a baked-in market for that already that was okay?
I think strangely, I don't know about strangely, but like we kind of became known for keeping it a little weird. You know, like serving squab still with the foot on in a pithivier, like the whole thing. And
So you have trust from your customers.
it took a while, but like that really is why we can keep it weird. I don't think it's weird, but people think
That's
it's
how
weird.
it lands. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, like after a while, it just became kind of like what we were known for. And, you know, I remember when we opened and we had the foie dish. Now we have like 3 foie dishes on the menu. Like, and before it was like, oh, you know, no one's going to order that, especially like being in the Grove, right? Like being in the Grove, people are like, people in the Grove don't want that. It's like, well, we're going to see. I mean, I don't know. And I think a lot of that had to do with like, it's just like, if I didn't take all this risk to get here and be like, I'm just gonna do what everyone else is doing, why the fuck would I do it to begin with? So that's why I was like, we're gonna try, and if people don't like it, then I guess we'll have to reassess. But people liked it, like the venison tartare. This is like its third iteration on the menu. Like we opened with that shit on the menu. And it was just like an evolution all the time. We had calf's liver on the menu for a while that was inspired by Marco Pierre White's calf's liver dish. And it's just like, it sold pretty well. Like, I just like, even if I would sell just 4 or 5 a night, I'm like, that's pretty shocking. Frog legs too. We did that. We did a frog leg croquette for a while. And people loved it. It's just like, all the time I'm like, if you don't try, like, you're not going to know. You're not going to know. And I always tell my guys all the time when they're like, I don't know if people are going to order this, whatever. Just fucking try it. Who cares? Like,
Do you ever send stuff out just so people can
not
expand
really
their horizons?
I mean, oh yeah, for like if they don't order it, send it to them anyways.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
For sure, all the time. Like
But you send the more kind of exotic or
always.
Yeah.
And it's always like, and also like the original foie dish that's on the menu was built for like the Cuban person that has no idea what the fuck that is, that's not going to order because they don't want to know, because they don't know what it is. And then when they try it, they're like, wow, this is delicious, because it's done in a way that's incredibly relatable to the city, to myself, to them, to just like Miami in general. And then when they have it, like, wow, that was delicious. What is that? I'm like, it's foie. What's foie? Okay, then we get into this whole conversation. I'm like, oh, but you need to try this, and you should try that, and and then it just like they would start taking like more steps of just like being willing to try stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's really why that menu has always evolved into a place that's like, where can we go now? Like, the duck press was actually a super hard sell at the beginning. And it was like, I had been thinking about it for years. I had always wanted to do that. And I'm just like obsessed with like just the history behind it. And
you're like a closet Frenchie.
Super. Yeah. Obsessed with like the history behind it.
Yeah.
And how like just like old school and like weird.
Yeah.
And I love that. And like, can we make it our own? Can we make it Miami? Can we totally change how this is done? And then I went through like a bunch of testing for it. And then I put it on the menu somewhat, just kind of verbally. But we spent a ton of money. Like, this is back when we didn't have a ton of money buying a duck press, and I made a custom cart, and, we bought special Wedgwood plates for it, and like this whole thing. And I just wanted it to be like, you can have this like super like chill, cool experience, like listening to Celia Cruz and then hip hop and then like weird blues and all this, like in this very dark room that's super loud. But then also you get this super refined but also very Miami experience at the end of it. And then I became friends with Ryan in DC that has an amazing duck press also. And we just started shooting the shit. And then I went up to DC and I hung out with him and we talked about the duck press a lot. He did it for me. We talked through it some more. And that's, again, creation through collaboration and just like really saying like, hey, I don't know it all. Like, I would love to learn from you. Like, can we trade ideas and thoughts or whatever? And it just like every week it got better and got better. And then we just put it on the menu and said, we're just going to do 2 a night. At this point, we only had like, I don't know, 21 ducks hanging to dry. We're like, shit, that'll be plenty. Now we have like 140 ducks hanging at one time.
Really?
Yeah. Because like on any
Well, you've made it a signature thing. It's on your website.
It just kind of like, then we started selling out every night.
Yeah.
We're like, all right, so now we could do like 4. And then we'd sell out every night. And then now we'd do 5. And then we'd sell out every night. And then we'd do 8, And then it just kind of became a thing. And I love that it became a thing because so many people were like, that shit will never work. And I'm like, but have you tried? Have you given the guest a chance? It's always like, Miami's not ready for it. Why aren't they ready? You're not ready for it. You're not ready to do it. That's the reality. You're not willing to take the risk to do it. So just like, just fucking try, man. Like, that was always my biggest thing. People aren't ready for it. Maybe you're not ready for it. I don't know.
I just realized something. I think you're like the perfect messenger for this stuff. Because you're from here.
Yeah.
You're of Cuban descent. Mm-hmm. You've trained with, at least one Florida legend.
2. I mean, Schwartz,
Oh, right, Schwartz.
Schwartz
I'm
will
sorry, I
say
forgot.
he's a legend. I'm not sure.
Schwartz
Jerry's still
will
out.
say it? Okay. I mean, anyway, but you, you know how to talk to people here. You're not like some guy who came down from New York
Right.
to like show the yokels how it's done.
Right. I mean,
like you are able to, when somebody expresses hesitation or a doubt, you can read them.
Yeah.
Like, kind of, you get a vibe, and you can probably tailor how you sell it to them. I don't mean sell it in a mercenary way.
No,
but like
I get
how
it.
you convey it to them. You can probably, like, in an instant be like, oh, I know I know how to talk to this person.
100%.
Right?
It's also,
And I think that's part of the reason you've been able to make that work.
but it's also like, just exhausted about hearing like food in Chicago is great. It is great. Food in New York is great. It is great. Food in Nashville is great. Food in LA is great. Then Miami's like, no, fuck off. The food here is fucking great. You just need to take the time, right? And I think from like the chef perspective, a lot of people did like a lot of great things, and they paved the way for us. Like they really did. They opened the door completely. Look, when Pub Belly opened and Jose Mundin was doing what he was doing, he absolutely crushed it, right? And like that was a restaurant that I think will forever change Miami. It will forever change Miami because people were going there. It was a lot like Animal in a lot of ways, like people were going there and eating all kinds of shit that people would never eat. And Jose's the one who really started doing that first.
Yeah.
All I did was continue that, and it's always that continued conversation. It's like, well, that's never going to work. I just feel like you're fucking scared, man. And that's something that forever, it's like, it is risky for sure. Like the guy I worked for before was not a huge risk taker, but he was like incredibly talented. Like his food was lights out. It's like, let's just take a risk. Like, let's just try something different, And it was like, no. Okay, well, that's fine. And that's really like always when I said, I want to open my own place. I want to open my own place. I want to open my place because I just want to stop fucking listening to people. I just want to just like do it.
But what you're talking, the attitude you're describing is this is how things have always changed. All the like all the guys of the Nouvelle Cuisine movement in France, right? When they broke away from the classic French dishes, they didn't get any attention. These people who are like legend, like Paul Bocuse, these people who are legends now, they didn't get any love from the media when they started. They weren't winning awards.
Right.
They weren't getting stars. And then people came around,
Yeah.
and then, all these legends that we talk about, like, Jeremiah Tower and Jonathan Waxman and Alfred Port. Like when these people first started, they were like, the old guard was like, what are these people doing? That's not food. It's like when parents go, that's not music. That's not music. When they hear rock and roll. But it's always, and I'm not just blowing smoke at you, but it's always been people who are willing to take the risk.
I remember reading Larry Forgione book, and he did this like sauce that was finished with duck cracklings. And I'm like, fascinating. This is amazing. This is not new. This is not like a new thing. This has been done. Why don't we see this more? I remember trying it, and like I had obviously I'm not Larry Forgione, so like dealing with like working through it, and like maybe thinking how he thought, and then serving it to some guests, and like, oh, it's a little weird. And then I remember changing that sauce somewhat, reading a Vetri book, and he had a duck dish, he had a duck sauce, and I'm like, well, what if these two things got married together? And then working through that, again, this is not like me reinventing the wheel. This wheel already exists. Someone's already done it, and these are two absolute fucking legends, right? And the dish was delicious. This was way before the duck press. This was like, because you can't do it twice on a menu. So like this was like year 3 or something. This area was not super busy, but picking up, so it was better. It was such an amazing dish, right? And it was like, and I remember talking to people about it, and they were just kind of like, I don't know, it sounds kind of weird. I'm like, yeah, but it's like it's been done already. Like these two fucking guys know what they're talking about, right?
Right.
Like So we just try it a little bit different. I remember serving it to be like, wow, this is amazing. That dish lived on the menu probably for like 8 or 9 months. But it's like stuff like that that gave me faith. I remember, so the foie dish that it's been like our signature dish since the day that we opened, I remember reading an old Cuban cookbook and then reading one of Norman's books. And then it was like there was a connection between both recipes. I'm like, oh, that's super interesting. And then I was like, I remember I have a notebook that's old, and I was like, I remember reading it just recently, and like all my thoughts about this thing are like, man, this is like really in depth for me. But I was like, this is pretty cool. So I was like reading all the thoughts through it, and like how Norman thought about that dish, and then like the classic Cuban dish, and like how can these things get married together. And then it ended up being a dish that I presented to Norman when I worked for him. And I remember he looked at me and was like, man, this is delicious, but we already have a foie dish. And I'm like, cool, that's fine, I respect that. So it obviously never went on the menu, thankfully, because then I just put it on mine. And it was like, I don't know, like I think food, when you read a lot of like old school food writing, a lot of things have been done over and over and over again. It's all about how you apply it to like your knowledge and like how you want your guest to dine, and I wanted our guests to understand that like we're not scared to take a risk. I also want you to understand that I understand you. We're both from here, right? Like the ones that are from here, like maybe not into like whatever, like you live in Kendall or you live in South Miami, and like you're, progressive Cuban American food isn't really a thing that you even know what that means. It's cool. Let's talk about it. Let's work through it. And that was like, I think that's why like I look at area, like every time I walk into that space, it's like home for me, because that's really where I understood what my mission was.
And not everything has to be for everybody.
No, you don't have to be everything to everybody. You just have to be something to a small group of people.
Enough people to support,
Right.
To keep you doing what you like to do. There was a chef, he's up in Connecticut now, but there was a guy named Gabe McMacken in New York. Probably a contemporary of yours, I would guess. He had a restaurant called The Finch in Brooklyn, and he had a Michelin star, and he did very slightly avant-garde stuff, delicious. And he said once in a while somebody would walk in and they probably wanted a burger or salad,
Yeah.
and he didn't do that. He didn't have the roast chicken, he didn't have the burger, he didn't have the garden salad, and he and we were talking, and one of us said to the other, they came to the wrong place,
Right.
They came to the wrong place.
100%.
That's okay.
It's man, the amount of times that people be like, the guests would like to do, and man, I remember the days that I would be like working saute, like because the area's completely open, like you could see all of my facial expressions and pretty much hear everything I say. The guest wants to do, no, you can't do that. This is the wrong place. The menu is online. 100%. We also have an Instagram. You can see all the things that we're doing. Like, this isn't like just have it your way. We had and have a mission. Like if you're a dentist, I don't go in there and tell you how to do your job. It's just like the reality is, I wanted that restaurant to mean more. I wanted it to mean more to the community. And man, certain days that I think about that it just make me like, man, this has been a fucking wild ride. When we won the Star, 2 years ago, I remember like I just getting up and going for a jog. Just jogging around, or I go into Tropical Park. I used to do the stands, jog around, whatever. And people stop me like, "Hey, man, we're so proud of you." Like, who the fuck are you? I don't even know who you are. And it's like, man, thank you so much for doing what you're doing. Like, it just blew me away, because like a lot of times when you're working and you're on the grind, you don't really realize that there's people watching and listening.
Oh yeah.
And because we do our podcast, and it's like people are like, "Hey, you remember when you said that?" I'm like, absolutely not. I don't remember that I said that.
I just quoted you, by the way, and I don't know if you heard it.
No.
I was interviewing Mark Vetri. I'm sorry I interrupted you, but
That's okay.
I quoted you.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I just like when people do stuff and like they're listening and they're watching, and like when this space that we're sitting in, does the highest volume in the whole company. Like, it do 600 people on a Sunday. And it's like, the amount of people are like, man, I love Chugs. And I'm like, that's crazy. It started as a pop-up while I was in New York, eating at Frankel's, right? Frankel's, it's a deli.
Where?
And I don't remember. I'm really bad with
That's okay.
directions in New York. New York, everything is
That's okay.
a subway away, apparently. But just like, and then I get a call like, hey, you want to do this pop-up? And then now it's like, people come here. I've seen kids grow up, like from like 1-year-old to now they're like 4, you know? So, wait, what did you quote me with Vetri? What happened there?
Well, I don't want to get us in trouble, but
No, it's okay.
it was first of all, if you go listen to it, I'm going to apologize for sometimes I randomly have trouble calling up names of people, movies, what. So I had seen a clip on your Instagram. I think maybe I can't remember, but we were talking about the whole idea of how you can no longer have an unpaid stage,
Oh,
right?
right.
And you had, I forget who you were interviewing,
Uh-huh.
but you made the point that you were like, look, you can go and, I'm paraphrasing, but,
Sure.
you could go to cooking school
Yeah.
and shell out tens of thousands of dollars
Correct.
to learn.
Yep.
Okay. Or you can go get a job in a kitchen. Someone takes you under their wing.
Right.
They teach you the craft. They invest in you. Okay. Up until X number of years ago, you don't get paid for that, but
Right.
you're not shelling out tens of thousands of dollars on cooking school, right? And I found that to be an extremely compelling argument. No one has yet been able to tell me how that's incorrect. And I said that to Mark. I said, what's the difference? And he goes, there's no difference.
Right.
You know? And because he was talking about how he came up, and then we said, he can't do this anymore.
Right.
And then I said, I think I probably said, like, I don't know. I know that's what everyone's supposed to say now,
Right.
but I don't think I really have a problem with it.
I mean, I don't know. When I look at,
I mean-
so you have to live the majority of your life in debt for something you're probably not going to end up doing.
or won't be
long-term.
lucrative unless you're in the very, 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 very top.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd prefer to go get a job making $10 an hour, learning how to do things the right way from a young age. But again, that's just me. And
Yeah,
like,
it's just an opinion.
it's an opinion, and everyone's like, they poo-poo that all day, and like, it's so abusive. And I'm like, what's abusive is how the system has trained us to go to college and then live our lives with debt for a long time, especially in the cooking world. Like in the cooking world, I mean, I remember, because I went to a small program. Thankfully, I didn't go to like years of culinary school, but it's like, hey, you're gonna leave here, you're gonna be a sous chef, you're gonna make $65,000 a year. Really? You don't even know how to butcher a chicken, kid? What do you mean?
Right.
I'm not going to pay you. What do you mean? I don't understand. Like, okay, can you break down that fish? No? So explain to me how you deserve this job.
Now, I will tell you, I know people who went to cooking, who thought that was, for them, it was the perfect way to start, right? That's fine.
Yeah.
Not everyone can afford it. Not everybody wants the debt if they can't afford it. And you said college generally is I'm putting twins through college right now,
God
my
bless you.
wife and I. And I will tell you, I often jokingly, but everyone knows I'm not joking, because I think the tide's turning on that.
Yeah.
And I said, I say this to my kids, and I definitely say it to my wife. We're among the last generation who's gonna buy into this notion that kids have to go to college.
Yeah.
Like, we are among the what we could have bought a house with what we're spending on college,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And we're renting still in New York City, right?
Yeah.
And it's okay. It's where things are. Yeah, okay, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be an engineer, you got to go to college. If you're going to go into marketing, if you're going to go into public relations, if you're going to go, whatever it is, most professions do not require a college education, nor does most of life.
Right.
But I hear this more and more from people, and I think that, I'm telling you, 20 years from now, maybe even less, I don't think it's going to be a given. Like, if you don't go to college, you're making a horrible decision. You'll be lucky to get a job. I think AI is a much bigger threat to people in the future than not having gone to college.
Yeah. I mean, I just think that the way that the world is changing, it's also like, a lot of times people go. There's also different reasons to go to college, right? Like if you're going to be a lawyer, a doctor, like yeah, that's a whole thing, right? But like when you go in, you don't really know what you want to do, and you just kind of like meander for years, and then you leave there. And I'm speaking from experience. You leave there with a fuck ton of debt, and then you're starting life pretty much at the negative. It's like, what did I just do? It's really like I think it's a little bit of a broader conversation now than it used to be, because like back in the day, you went to high school, then you went to college.
Yeah, and if you said I'm not going to college,
right?
Your parents were like, "Are you out of your mind?"
You were a pariah. If you said I'm not going to college, it means you're an absolute fuck. You are a fuck up.
It wasn't even a question,
right? So it's just, I don't know. And I think in the food world, man, we get a lot of kids all the time that never been to culinary school and want to learn, and it's like, cool. I mean, we're gonna give you an opportunity. You're gonna start at the absolute bottom, but like the real hungry ones, like they want to get on the line. They're gonna stay after their shift ends, and they're gonna watch how the line works, or they're gonna talk to people, and they're gonna take notes. And it's like, I fucking love that, because that's how I was. So it's like, yeah, I mean, it's cool. Like, oh, your shift starts at 4. I remember this was the absolute worst job. One of the worst jobs I ever had, because we were next to a theater. So we would do like a theater menu for 2 hours. And my station had a half wood grilled chicken that just, I had to butcher like 4 cases of chicken a day. And I was like, oh, so you get into work at 3:30. We open at 5. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to set up my entire station and break down 4 cases of chicken properly. So I'd have to get to work at like fucking 12:30. Whatever. That was part of the gig. And it's like, but I'll tell you right now, I will smoke people butchering chicken right now. But that's because of years of doing that. And it's like, everything is like a lesson, and it's a lesson learned, and it's very important. Like there's stuff that I do now that I'm like, man, I learned that when I was like 22 or 23 in a random kitchen, flipping eggs, like whatever it was. And I think the value in that, it's not as important as it used to be, I don't think. And I worry about like the evolution of where cooking will go, because there's less and less people that really love it like how they used to, I think.
Oh, well, I guess. I know people, this isn't unique to your industry, right? This is everywhere. People want to advance more quickly. I mean, here again, you asked me what I've seen change. When I first got around your industry, it was normal for somebody to spend like 4 or 5 years working for like a Jean-Georges or a Danielle or whoever, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe they'd leave when they were sous chef, and then they'd go work for someone else like that.
Yeah.
For another 4 or 5 years, and then they start thinking about, okay, maybe now I'm ready to be the chef, Right. And for a long time now, like I hear it all the time, I want to have a restaurant by the time I'm 30. Mm-hmm. I want to have my own restaurant by the time I'm 30. That was not the way people spoke.
Right.
And I always say this, things change, and we all have to accept it. You're not going to change the way things are moving. It's just going to happen. But that's definitely different. But for younger cooks, I think they should recognize, especially with all the people who left the industry during COVID, if you come in, if you're driven, if you are a hard worker, if you're a little patient, and don't start asking for a promotion after 3 weeks.
Right.
There is so much opportunity to rise up through the ranks today. Mm-hmm. I mean, I always say, to me, if I were going to boil it down, all a chef is looking for from an employee is someone who's going to make their life easier. Yeah. I think that applies to the whole everything, right? Mm-hmm. And if you are that person who shows initiative, who takes the time to get really good at whatever the tasks are that you've been assigned at the moment, who
shows up on time,
shows up on time.
Yeah. God forbid.
That was Bourdain's big thing. That was the non-starter. If you were late.
It's like I'm only 2 minutes late.
Right.
You just incriminated yourself. You're late. You just said it. You're late.
I know.
But I'm only 2 minutes late. What?
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Yeah.
It's just those things to me, it's like.
I had an employee once who was late all the time. I'm not in a kitchen. I've never worked in a kitchen, but they were late all the time. And after like the 4th time, I said, do you know this is like the 4th time you've been late? And they go, well, there've been delays. I said, well, maybe you need to leave earlier. Yeah. And they said, well, I know how long it takes me to get to work. And I said, I don't think you do. It was like a Seinfeld thing. I'm like, I don't think you do. You've been late 4 times in 10, in 2 weeks, in 10 business days. You've been late 40% of the time.
Man, the
like
world is
clearly,
great.
whatever subway line you take is subject to delays. Like
Right.
you got to build that in.
Right.
I mean, I thought it was the funniest thing. I thought it was funny in the moment. I still think it's funny, but if you do all those things right, there's always someone in a kitchen who, often there's someone in the kitchen who you're like, that person's going up fast. You can tell.
Yeah, my goal, like when I was a young cook, was always like, okay, so I'm like the youngest cook in here. So like, how do we outcook everyone else? How do we just like, so you got to be a dog. You just got to get here earlier. Your mise en place needs to be tighter. Your station needs to be cleaner. I fucking miss those days. Just like, it was just one station, one thing. Wow, it's amazing. It's just still like, I think about it like, man, that was so much fun. It was so great. And it's, you still see a good amount of that. I feel like, I don't know. I was lucky to come up in like so many different styles of kitchens. The people around me were always much older, and I learned a ton from all of them, good and bad, what to do and what not to do. But it was like, it's just that thing of like running your own station. It's just, and then, the team thing. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So let me, like, I have to say, like, what do you think has been the conversation with chefs over the last 25 years, the one that sticks out the most? Maybe the one that, like, you actually...
You mean like an interview I've done?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, the one that I've actually... You said what's been the one that stands out
Like
the most?
the one that just,
you actually...
like the one that has, like, hit you the most. Like, maybe, I don't know, that it had, like, maybe an effect on you. Maybe something that stayed with you for a long time.
Personally.
Yeah.
A couple come to mind, if that's okay. One is I had an amazing interview with Patrick O'Connell at the Inn at Little Washington.
What a legend.
And, my last book, at some point I decided I was going to mainly focus on New York, LA, and the Bay Area. This book I wrote about the American chef explosion in the 70s and 80s. And I had a great interview with Patrick, and I just, he wasn't going to be a major character in the book because of what I was focusing on. And he's had his whole career just outside of DC. Like
right.
that, he's self-taught. That's the only restaurant he's worked in.
Right.
And I felt really bad about it. And I went 2019, June, I think. I went with a press group to the Inn at Little Washington. I'd never been there. And I did an interview with him. And it's the first time I'd met him in person. And first of all, that interview is one of my listeners' favorite interviews. It's just, he's so smart in the way his philosophies of management and what he's done there and all of that. But at the end of the interview, I apologized to him. And he could not have been more gracious. He was so perfect. Because I told him what I said, we had this phone interview. He goes, I remember. And I said, I did the book. And I didn't really have anywhere to put you. And I said, that's the one thing I regret. I said, I wish I could have done better by you. And he goes, oh, he really sounded like he felt for me. And he goes, well, we're here now. And it was so perfect. It was so perfect. And I'm in touch with him, and that was great. Oh, I'll tell you a moment. This is a great moment. And I didn't realize how great it was till I listened back to it. There's a Danish chef named Bo Beck. I don't know how many listeners will know who he is, but
I have his book.
Important guy, very talented. And I've interviewed him a couple of times. And one time we interviewed at the Philly Chef Conference in the lobby of the hotel we were in. That was the second time. So I already done the big biographical interview. And Bo sounds very intense. He has a very deep voice, and and actually the first time I had him on, I got emails after from people going like, "Is that guy a jerk?" Or I'm like, "No, he's the best." But they didn't have the benefit of sitting with him in a room.
Right.
And his voice, he sounds a little severe, because he's Danish. I mean, there's nothing.
Right.
It's just how he sounds. But he's a sweetheart, great guy, and he also, he has a dark beard and he looks, shaved head, and
Right.
So we're sitting in this lobby and we're having an interview, and I forget what it was, but he asked me something, and I gave him this response that I said, well, it kind of goes back to my childhood, and I just feel very self-conscious. I think I might have been talking about the speech I'd made at a dinner we were all part of a few nights earlier. And he starts going on about himself and his parents, but then he brought it back to me, and he was like, I'm trying to tell you that these things are like stones in your pocket, and they weigh you down, and you need to get rid of these stones. He was giving me almost like, I'm sure I'm older than he is, but he was basically giving me like what I consider like paternal advice,
Right.
Saying like, let go of that stuff. Let go of that stuff. And in the moment, we're in a hotel lobby. I'm going interview to interview, as I do at these events.
Right.
And it didn't hit me. And then, when I went to edit it and I heard it back, I was like, oh my God. Like, he really opened up in service of me, That was great. That was amazing. On a personal level, that's pretty high up there.
Cool.
And then just you said some nice things at the beginning of this interview. I stumbled into your world. I never intended to be a food writer. Like I said, I was trying to be a screenwriter. I do love your industry. Some of the people, just the fact of them being willing to give me the hour, is that alone is really moving to me. And then very broadly, just, I don't know, just the amount of trust people give. I think I have a decent reputation now, and people tend to come in pretty open, and that's very meaningful to me. But I think that thing with Bo, I'm sure there have been others where people have offered me something like that, but I was very touched by that, especially from someone who, I've only met in person maybe twice in my life.
Right. I think the trust portion, I've talked to Nick about this like a lot when it comes to like food writing. Just talk about like on a local level, semi-national level, whatever. There's a lot of like stuff that gets written that isn't someone that's trying to learn about a person, right? And that's a lot of times, like we talk about that, like, that's why we started our podcast, right? Because I wanted industry people and chefs and just people in general, like to get a real feeling of like why is this person doing what they're doing?
Yeah.
What got them here? Also see them in a different environment that's just not like a kitchen or a restaurant or whatever. And I think people that are willing to take the time to understand people's story for our industry, like it gains a lot of trust, because a lot of people, obviously the world of chefs has changed dramatically over the last 20 years, right? Like,
Yeah.
they went from being the help in the back to then being the celebrity, then to being on TV, next Food Network star, then, like BBC. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just been like, it's like all over the place, right? A lot of these people are just people that really love their craft and they want to talk about it. And like, they want to talk about their story and why they do what they do. And I think that that's something that's pretty amazing that you've done. Like, be a voice for a lot of people. Like, why do I love what Tony Bourdain did for chefs in general? Because he gave us like the feeling and basically said, it's cool to be yourself. Fuck everybody else. And if they don't like it, whatever. And that to me is like, I'll carry that with me forever. And it's like, when people are willing to listen and they're willing to understand our stories, I think that, that's why it's amazing what you've done, right?
Thank you.
It's really just like one of those things that, man, like, I don't know how much you read. Just not Miami. There's a lot of places like local media, like they don't care. It's copy and paste from a press release, and there's no like actual information about like what's happening here. What is the food? What is the story? Like, let's get in depth. There's not a lot of that shit, and it's like getting to know people. Like, that shit is like, it's such a fast world now. Like people want information like the 1, 2 points, 1, 2, and 3. Cool. It's got a lot of like fancy things, a lot of gold. Cool, I'll go. I'll make a reservation for Friday. There's nothing about real food, nothing about a story, nothing about, and I think it's incredibly valuable. Like what you provided, just background, like understanding. It's just like huge. We touched on Vetri a couple times. Like, man, I had heard stories about Mark Vetri forever, because I worked for Schwartz and they're super tight.
Yep.
I've just like admired his food from afar for such a long time. And then I had the opportunity to go. And so like I knew his story, and I had read a lot of his stuff and a lot of his work. I took the time or whatever. And I remember when I went there, because I knew his story and his food so well, and then I ate there, it blew my mind. Like it's just so incredibly like simple but meaningful and like thoughtful. And then he came, and I'm not like I don't get starstruck ever. Like it's not my thing. Then he came and he sat next to us and he talked to us for like half an hour. I'm like, fuck me, man. Not only is like all the stories true, you are cool as fuck.
He's a real one.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just a guy.
But it's like, it's just like when you add context to people's stories, like I think it makes food and restaurants so much more meaningful. It's not just, I'm trying to go somewhere to eat something. Even though, I know it's just that, but it's like, it is just so much more for a lot of people, I think.
Well, thank you for all that. I will say, I hear what you said about the media all the time. These people who have jobs with websites or it's not really their fault. They're under a lot of pressure.
1,000%, I get it.
To turn in stuff quickly, to also be, you were talking about all the hats a chef has to wear. I think they would love to be able to do long form interviews, a lot of them, and they just don't have a place to do it.
Yeah.
I remember when I used to have a blog and I would do these interviews, and they were like 1,200 words. And people would started saying to me like, oh, you do long form. I'm like, long form? 1,200 words? Like, well, where are we headed?
I love how Nick laughs at that.
But where are we going, And now we're there,
Yeah.
Now we're there because like, who's going to read that much?
Well, it's the way the world has changed.
Yeah.
It's the way the way that we consume information. It needs to be fast. It needs to be pretty.
Yeah.
You need to double click it. It needs to have a little heart on it. All those things. Again, it's just the way that the world has changed. And that's what meaningful restaurants and meaningful stories behind food. The reason why, like a restaurant is so important to me, it's the last place you could like sit here and have a conversation over a meal and talk with people. And it's like, I don't know. It worries me so much about the future. I'm glad I'm like in this generation right now.
Oh yeah.
Because I worry about like the next one when it comes to food. So it's like, I've had plenty of hurdles. That's going to be theirs. And I think that it's so important. And then when you start to get to know people and stories, it's pretty fascinating to me. And I don't know. I guess we'll have to see how it all goes.
Yes.
Right.
I also am glad to be of my generation.
Right.
I mean, the things I'm so glad I don't have to be dating at this time. It's crazy.
I mean,
it's crazy.
The world itself is just like, I can only talk about Miami, right? Because from here, I've only left here for 4 years one time, and Miami has changed so much, a lot for good, a lot for bad. But when you love a place, like it just is what it is,
Yeah.
And it's like, we were just talking about the Grove when this all started and like how much this has changed and like exponential growth of Miami. Like we're just, we're just keep on going west and like how it just keeps on getting bigger. And I don't know, man, it's, I really feel like, especially restaurants, just because I feel like restaurants are always a thing that start neighborhoods. We're going to start seeing them change more and more over the next like 2 decades, I feel.
Well, hopefully you and others will resist.
Nah, I think we will. I think that there's like a really strong group of people here that they're just really about their business, really about putting out great food. And I think we just see it every single day. It's going to continue to grow.
Well, I also think that hospitality is a real piece of restaurants like the ones you have, and I don't think technology is a thing, but I don't think that human touch will ever be completely out of it. And before we end, I just want to say, as someone who grew up here, thank you for being one of the people who, you know, is the reason why there's restaurants here that
Thanks.
I really want to go to when I come down. You know, I come down with a list now. I mean, I haven't been here since pre-COVID.
So your list is pretty long.
The list is long.
What's on your list? I'd love to
Well,
know.
all of your places.
Thanks. That's good.
You know, Maddie's, which I went to last night.
It's amazing, right?
Yeah, it's great. And I don't want to name too many because then I'll leave out places. But yeah, but it's I'm doing an event with him, but I'm eating at Brad Kilgore's. I'm eating at Marigold's tomorrow. You know, I've never had Brad's food. You know, so yeah. But it's, you know, I got to come down again just to make the rounds. But anyway, I appreciate what you're doing here. I think it's great. I love your show.
People actually listen to this thing.
Well, you knew that.
It's just we still say that. Nick still doesn't know how to work that thing.
Well,
Look at me still struggling. So good.
I mean, I'm almost 300 episodes into my show, and like I'm still startled when somebody tells me, you know, and I'm especially startled when it's I'm kind of used to line cooks now because I think they learn a lot.
Yeah, for
you
sure.
know, but every once in a while, someone I really admire will tell me they're a listener, and I'm like, really?
Yeah.
You know, and I'm like, you would think I'm in my first job, you know, or
it's
never
crazy.
written a book, you know, like it blows my mind.
Blows my mind too.
Or sometimes I'll get recognized. I get recognized more often by voice
Oh yeah.
than by face. Like I'll be in a restaurant and I'll think someone's eavesdropping, but they're just trying to make sure it's me. And they'll be like, "Are you Andrew?" And it'll be like a cook from somewhere or a chef
cool.
from somewhere. That's happened a few times.
Yeah, it's always. I love the fact that there's like line cooks that listen to our show too. It's pretty wild. I mean, you know, anything that I feel like positively impacts the food community is like super down for it. It's also like we've had some pretty cool people on here.
Oh God.
There it is. Yeah, you figured it out. That's good.
What does that mean? Is that quitting time?
No, that was the effect that I was looking for earlier when Mike
It took
was
him
making
20
fun of me
minutes to
for-
figure it out.
Yeah,
Got
yeah.
it.
Well, I think we could start to wind down a bit, yeah?
I think so.
Nick is back. Look, Nick is back.
Nick is back. Apologies for me. I don't know if you caught me cracking up. COO Brittany Rothwell was making obscene gestures at the front door through the glass. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. We're such a loving group here at Ariat Hospitality. It's the best.
So I don't know, for purposes of you using the recording, you're good with cutting it off here, and then you do
yeah.
some kind of outro?
Absolutely.
Great. So what we would normally do, which you might already know from listening to the thing, is we end on first our parting recommendations. So you'll recommend anything at all that you want, as long as it's not yours, and then we'll shift into shameless plugs where you tell people where to find all of your stuff, where to follow you, and all that. So we'll let you go first, unless you want to give us, have us give you a little bit of time to think about what you're recommending. But you might already have some stuff in the pocket.
No, I'm good.
All right, yeah. So by all means, parting recommendations.
My parting recommendations are Athletic Brewing non-alcoholic beer.
Oh, nice.
My wife, not entirely, but recently backed off of alcohol significantly.
Amazing.
And, you know, like Samuel Jackson says in Pulp Fiction, my girlfriend's a vegetarian, which pretty much makes me a vegetarian. So my wife's cut down on alcohol, which means I've cut down on, you know, I don't open bottles of wine at home anymore.
Right.
I'm always on the lookout for non-alcoholic beer that's really good. And Athletic Brewing, every one of the beers in their line, I really like. We've talked about it on the show, but since I'm here in Miami, I will say I was very impressed by the team at Maddie's restaurant
Great.
last night. I mean, having grown up here, the level of finesse on the food, the level of service, the decor, everything, every detail, you know, and even 15, 20 years ago, chef friends I had down here, they could find cooks.
Yeah.
It was the dining room team they had problems with.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
I think, sorry to cut you off, but I do think that the hospitality portion of Miami has vastly improved. Like the front of the house side it's a different culture and understanding. And I know he referred to Brittany, but like Brittany's from Philly. What she brought to the table for us was an absolute game changer, because I didn't know chef, so it's like it was pretty amazing.
The last thing I'm going to recommend, there is a feeling out there amongst the industry that the TV show The Bear is the most accurate depiction of a restaurant ever put on TV or film. Do people not say that around here?
I mean, I've only watched the first season.
I've heard it said though.
Yeah,
a lot of people say that.
I would agree.
Okay, there is a little known, largely forgotten movie. I think it's about 20 years old, called Dinner Rush. For the longest time, you could not watch it. There had to be like a rights issue. It was on none of the streamers. Periodically, it would show up on YouTube in its entirety until somebody made them take it down, for copyright infringement. I think it's on Amazon Prime now, but you can watch it now.
I love that.
It is a movie starring Danny Aiello. Mm-hmm. John Corbett has a small part. Sandra Bernhard has a small part. For people who like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, the recently deceased Mark Menendez, who played Hector Salamanca, plays a very annoying art dealer in it. But it takes place on one night in a restaurant in Lower Manhattan, and it was directed by a guy named Bob Giraldi, who was a very successful commercial director. He also directed music videos, including the Michael Jackson Beat It video.
Well, that's a big one.
But Giraldi owned I can't even remember the name of it. He owned a restaurant in Tribeca. Mm-hmm. And he filmed that movie in his own restaurant. And it's a generational story. Italian-American father who runs a very traditional restaurant, and his son who's being groomed to take over, who runs the kitchen, who's trying to go be more modern and take Italian food in a new direction.
Push it.
And I have never seen a movie that so feels like what a kitchen felt like, what the food looked like, what the dining room feels like. At least at that time, this is the early 2000s, it is pitch perfect. And anyone out there who is in the industry, anyone out there who loves restaurants, I'm telling you, Dinner Rush, find it. You'll really enjoy it. It's also a good movie on top of all that. I think a lot of the restaurant stuff that's been made fails because they just, a lot of those movies and shows were just like, chefs are wild. Like there's no story, right? The movie has a very defined plot. It's a one-night movie, which I love movies that take place in one day or one night.
Right.
I think that's cool. Mm-hmm. It's almost in real time. And I highly recommend it. I think anyone who listens to you will love that movie.
Well, I'm pumped to
Dinner
watch
Rush.
That. Yeah.
Mike, parting recommendations?
Not as cool as his. So I watched the movie The Reptile. Right? That's what it's called?
I think it's called just Reptile.
Reptile?
Yeah.
Super entertaining. I was shocked that was actually pretty good. Man, I haven't really eaten anywhere at all whatsoever. I did just have a really nice meal at Fiola. A couple really good pastas. That was really nice. Chef Danny's crushing it.
That's the same Fiola as DC.
Yes.
I've been to the DC one. Those guys are great. Yeah, I like those restaurants.
Chef Fabio Trabocchi.
Yes.
I'm probably destroying his name, but that's, I think, how you should say it. Man, I think that's pretty much it, man. Like, yeah, I'm gonna end there. I think that's all I got.
Cool. So I'm gonna recommend. We've referenced Brian Jordan Alvarez before on this podcast.
Oh yeah. This guy.
So Brian, actually, I'm dying to get him on. I think he would make a hysterical guest for you.
Oh man.
So Brian Jordan Alvarez is an actor, and I guess like sort of turned Instagram comedian, but just to kind of fill you in a little bit. So he actually was just put or will be on Time Magazine's list of like the 100 most influential or something like that coming up. for his Instagram stories, which are all with those like funky filters that do weird stuff to your face. But what he's done is he's attached a different character to each one of these filters. One of them is like a maniacal chef who's opening 1,000 restaurants. But
And this is a recurring thing?
yeah, there's
That
like this
character is
There's this
recurring?
crazy like arc to all of the
entertaining.
characters. It's wild. Like I could, if somebody told me they were just putting them all in a row at a movie theater, I would pay money to go and sit and watch for hours. But one of those characters has recently started putting out pop songs, and they are now on all the streaming platforms. I have been blasting in my car a song called Chicas by TJ Mack, which is one of the characters. It's all about how all the women in his DMs need to get out of there because his wife looks at his phone.
Oh God.
It's fantastic. So anything by Brian Jordan Alvarez that is streaming now on the music things, I would check out. And if you were a fan of The Boys, which Danny Surfer recommended here, and we've talked about a few times, there's a spin-off called oh God, now I'm blanking on what it's called. It's an Amazon thing. It's a spin-off.
It's like Gen V or something.
Yeah, Gen V maybe. And it's about like, it's not quite as good, but it's fun. If you enjoyed The Boys, it's a nice like hold you over while you wait for The Boys to come back.
I actually just looked up parting recommendations that I sent you.
Okay, great.
This was after a couple drinks while watching football. It was Wingstop is pretty good. Lemon pepper chicken tenders.
You did do that. Shout out to Rick Ross.
Yeah, lemon pepper chicken tenders and the Cajun chicken sandwich. Solid.
Man, I ordered one of those chicken sandwiches. I thought it was awful. But it wasn't that one. It was a different one. But
I mean, I don't know. It was pretty good.
maybe the Cajun one's better.
Yes, I mean, I was pleasantly surprised.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, shameless plugs. Andrew, please shamelessly plug all your stuff.
I mean, I'll keep it brief. My big shameless plug, because it's just out, is my new book, The Dish: The Lives and Labor Behind One Plate of Food.
Amazing.
I take one dish at a restaurant in Chicago. So if you're a fan of the show The Bear, it's set in Chicago. My book is in Chicago. And I write, I profile all the key people whose lives and work come together in that one plate of food. So in the restaurant, you meet everybody from the dishwasher to the line cook, to the sous chef, to the chef de cuisine, to the chef owners, to the server. You meet all the farmers whose food is on that one dish, which includes a rancher and a winemaker. And my promise with the book is you'll never look at a restaurant meal the same way again.
Yeah.
It's available everywhere you buy books. And the only other thing, well, you already plugged my podcast. If you want to follow me, I'm on Instagram, Tokeland Andrew, TOQUELAND Andrew. And Toke, spelled that way, refers to the old-fashioned tall, white, cylindrical chef hats.
Yep.
Not to the other kind of toque, although I have no problem with that,
Yeah.
to say the least.
To say the least.
That's fine.
Mike, shameless plugs.
Go for it. All the things. I still got to recommend all my shit. I mean, we've done this 80 times already.
All the things. All the things. Arietta Nave, Scapegoat and the Taurus, Chubbs and the Gibson.
Wow.
All the things.
Yeah, all the things. We definitely don't have enough money to do this on our own.
Big Apparel, Scoops and Lorel, Miami against the world. All the things.
All the things. Insert song.
All the things.
All the things.
All the things.
Shameless plugs for Pangkong Podcast. We're Pangkong Podcast on all of the social media things. Give us all your money at patreon.com/dademag. You can, I still have some magnets. You can go buy magnets at the
Do
store
we still
on
have magnets?
dademag.com. And what else? Yeah, that's about it. Go to El Vecino. I'm usually there Mondays and Tuesdays. If I'm not, then too bad. Petey's also there a lot.
Perfect.
So, yeah, that's it. That's all I got.
Nice.
Thank you so much.
I have a lightning round.
Oh yeah, okay, perfect.
Love that.
If you're on Patreon, you'll hear the lightning round.
Yeah.
That is at the on the opposite end of these air horns. But for those who don't pay to hear us, thank Andrew. Andrew, thank you for joining us for this, man.
I'm glad we finally did this.
Man, it's
really
crazy.
glad.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I love that.
Stop.
I love that he still doesn't know how to use that thing. We've had that for like a year already.
Actually, you know what? I do need to put our theme music, so it'll be on the other side of this theme music.
All right, bye.
Yeah.
Yeah, see you later.
See you later, everybody.
It's fine.
This will give you a little time to.
Bonko Podcast is back. You know how many times I've heard that? Oh my God, you guys are finally doing it again. I'm
I
like,
know, yeah.
okay.
Relax, everybody.
Sorry, just take it easy. Take a breath. Perfect. I actually wrote these questions down.
Nice.
I know, that's shocking for me. I mean, I was in a car for 7 hours yesterday. So I have plenty of time.
True.